Hey team, welcome to this training that is going to be talking about your business corporation. So all of this is usually a very scary topic. It is actually very overwhelming in the beginning when you are a new business owner. So do not worry. Over the next couple training sections within this training, we are going to go ahead and simplify it. We're going to make it tactical. We're going to make sure that you understand each of the foundational elements of having your business corporation up and running as easy as possible, as tactical as possible, as cheap as possible. So that way you can get through this and focus on what actually matters, which is making the income and having the freedom for yourself and your family that you are looking to have. And so because that is the focus of what we are focusing on is, hey, we got to keep this going for you, right? We got to get the momentum going. We don't want you to get stuck in sitting here in like a semester of hours and hours and hours and weeks and weeks and weeks of, hey, business corporations and theory and all this stuff. We want to make sure that this is extremely practical for you. And so in this introductory training, I want to go ahead and very quickly talk to you about why do this now? Why is it important for us to talk about the business corporation side of things right now as you are going through the business basics? Because it is a very valid question, which is like, hey, why are we focusing on this right now and so early in the business basics, right? Shouldn't we be focusing on some of the more other important things like our business website and our email marketing and getting our sales and client agreements up and running, right? And so that is a very good question. And so this is actually something that is a pro tip that quite frankly, so few people understand. And this is something that we learned after helping thousands of students go through this process and go through this program over the years, is that the reason why, and listen to this very carefully, the reason why we are recommending and strategically placing this training where we are in this entire process, right? This is not random on how we've gone ahead and placed it. There is a method to the madness, okay? And so the reason why we've gone ahead and put this corporation training right here where we have is because it's better to do this sooner than later, already rather better to get started sooner than later, because sometimes what ends up happening is that this process of getting your corporation set up can actually take some time. And so this is what happens when you're working with governments or county offices and all of that kind of stuff, is that sometimes that admin and that paperwork, guess what? It takes time. And so what's going to end up happening is that if we went ahead and put this corporation training later on, after you had your business website started and all of your assets were ready and you had your sales going and you had your client agreement set up, and then it's like, okay, well, now you got to set up your corporation. Well, then what ends up happening is that you're sitting around and you can't actually stay in momentum, right? Then all of a sudden you got to sit around for a couple weeks and you have all these things that you're ready to go ahead and launch and get ready to go ahead and start making money, right? And so this is the reason why we are going to go ahead and recommend very, very quickly. We're going to give you the foundations of corporations in the next couple training sections, and we're going to go ahead and make it easy and tactical for you so that way you can get this process started in the background. And then as that process and as that paperwork is already coming through, you can make sure that you are going ahead and taking action going forward. Now, a question that you might have is, hey, for some of you, you may already be jumping into this with a business setup. You might already have a corporation set up. So is this going to be valuable for you? And the answer to that question is yes. Now, of course, you will be able to go through this a little bit faster, but do not skip it. I want to make it sure here, okay? So you can speed up the video a little bit if you're already familiar with the concepts, but do not skip it, because I guarantee you that you have never seen anybody or anyone or any organization or any program explain the concepts as simply and as easily that you are going to learn inside of this training. So even if you already have your LLC set up, you may not understand, how does a self-employment tax work? How does an LLC work? What is the actual benefits of the LLC? How am I going to leverage the LLC and the different types of LLCs that there are to actually make sure that I can save on the taxes so I can set this up properly? And so what you're going to learn is, hey, how does a corporation help you in your business? What are some of the kind of advanced strategies, not too advanced, but just some of the advanced strategies, and how to make sure that you have everything set up properly. Okay, so that is for those of you who have a corporation set up already. And if you do not have a corporation set up already, then this is going to be perfect for you, because you're going to go ahead and get all of the foundations to understand from the very beginning, as if you do not know anything. We're going to go ahead and build up your understanding step by step, layer by layer. So by the end of all of the training sections that you're about to go through, you will understand exactly how a corporation works, as well as getting your business corporation set up. Okay, so what I want to go ahead and emphasize, again, very, very important, do not get hung up on the upcoming training sections. Okay, so yes, you're going to go through them. Yes, some of them are going to be a little bit dense. Some of them might get a little bit complicated. complicated. Again, don't worry. We've gone ahead and made it very easy to understand, but it might get a little bit complicated. But what you want to understand is just keep on going through it. It's okay. You're marinating yourself for the first time, kind of like how you marinate chicken, right? You're marinating yourself. You're soaking yourself in the bath of all of this knowledge, but you don't want to get hung up on it, okay? So what you're going to see is us reminding you over and over and over again in the upcoming trainings is that what you're doing is that you're going ahead and getting this process started, but you will not be waiting for it to be completed before moving on. So again, what does that mean? You're going to go through these trainings. Do not skip them, okay? You're going to go through these trainings, and then when you get towards the last couple training sections, there's going to be some action steps. And those action steps are going to have you, depending on your specific situation, either setting up your corporation, and then in an upcoming training, we're going to walk you through setting up your business bank account. What you're going to do is that you're going to take the action, and then when you're waiting for somebody else to actually fill out their, forms, the government's got to do their thing, the IRS has got to do their thing, you're going to book an appointment with maybe the accountant, whatever. When you're waiting for that to go on, you do not wait. You continue going through business basics and you go ahead and get up your business platform, your business website, your email marketing, all of that. So we are telling you right now, do not wait for your corporation to be done before going out and setting up your website, your sales, your new client agreement, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So for those people who do end up just sitting around and looking for an excuse to be sitting around, they are 100% those wannabe business owners. They are not the professional entrepreneurs, because the truth is that the professional entrepreneurs, those who are the winners, the real entrepreneurs, what they do is they keep the momentum going. They do not stop moving. They keep moving. Okay. So do not say that we did not warn you. Ahead of time, we're letting you know, hey, you're going to go through these upcoming trainings. You're going to get this process started. You're going to understand the foundational understandings of how legal entities work, okay? And again, we're going to make it super easy, super simple over the next couple training sections, and we're going to remind you again at the end to keep on moving. Got it? I hope that is absolutely clear. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and jump right in to the next couple trainings in which we are going to go ahead and start breaking down each of the foundational understandings, the two types of legal entities. Why start a sole prop? Why start a corporation? What is an LLC? How does an LLC work? When to actually switch your LLC to a different type to actually save on taxes. All of that is foundational knowledge. Make sure you do not skip it. Make sure you take it step by step by step. We're going to walk you through it. Ladies and gentlemen, we will catch you in the next training section. All right, welcome back. Inside of this training, we will be talking about the two types of legal entities, okay? So what I want to go ahead and make clear is that right now, starting from this training and then the next couple trainings, okay, we're going to go ahead and go over the foundational understanding, the foundational terms, the foundational language, the foundational concepts that you are going to need to know before you can actually go out there and know, hey, which one do I start off with? How do I register it? Okay, how does all of this work? We're going to first talk about the foundational understanding, and then the second half of this training, okay, so I want to go ahead and make a very clear distinction here. Sometimes people get confused by this, so I'll make it very clear, okay? What you are going through right now is the entire training about legal entities and business corporations. Within this training, there are multiple training sections, okay? So what you are going through right now is the training section for the two types of legal entities. And then we're going to have a training section that is all about the sole prop, a training section that is all about the corporations, a training section that is all about the LLCs, the training section about all of the different options about how to choose and which option is going to be best for you based off your circumstance and situation. We're going to have a training section that is all based on the tactical action steps of what you got to do. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're following each of the training sections in order. Okay. And so the goal of this overall training is that we are going to make sure that by the end of this training, you have everything set up A to Z. You understand exactly how it works. You understand what the game plan is going to be. And we're going to do it in a way that's not going to overwhelm you. And it's going to make sure that you are understanding this step by step by step. Does that make sense? I hope so, okay? And the reason why we have taken the time, I cannot tell you how much I wish that there was a training like this when we started business. The reason why we have taken hundreds of hours of creating the images and putting the slides together, making sure that all the content lined up, making sure that it was all accurate, consulting with the experts on this. The reason why we have done that is because I cannot count how many new business owners that we have helped over the years who have gotten stuck on this very topic, okay? We see it all the time with beginners who are just getting started, and then this question of, hey, how do I deal with my business, my corporation? It absolutely haunts them. They ask questions like, hey, do I got to register my business with the government? How does all of this work? Should I start an LLC? a C Corp, an S Corp? What is a DBA? How does a DBA work? What is the best bank account that I got to start off with? Do I got to talk to a lawyer? Do I do this now? Do I do this when I start making money? Hey, can I get sued and go to jail if I don't do this properly? As well as all of the other gazillion questions that new business owners have around this topic. And quite honestly, all of that is extremely justified. All of these questions and all the other questions that you might have are justified because it is overwhelming at first. This is not one of those things that sometimes, there's like topics where some students or some new business owners will kind of blow out of proportion where it's kind of not that big of a deal, but they make it a big deal, right? But in this case, this entire corporation thing, I can fully understand why it is extremely overwhelming because we remember that when we were first starting out, this was scary for us as well, right? We were thinking, man, we got to deal with these taxes, with this government stuff. Like, hey, maybe we've only ever been a 9-to-5 employee. Maybe we've ever not even had a job before. Maybe we've only ever worked at, our local employer. We've only ever been employed. But then you're thinking, wait a second, I got to start a business. Oh man, this is scary. This could land me in jail. Or I could have a bunch of fines that I might not even know. Now, even if that wasn't 100% true, the truth is, we didn't know. And especially for those who are brand new to business, who have been working maybe a 9-to-5, they've never set up their own business before, all of it is so scary the first time you do it, okay? And then the worst part about this is that the general population, right? Think about your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your aunts, your uncles, right? They're just the general population that everybody just keeps on saying, hey, go to a lawyer, or hey, go talk to an accountant or something like that. And then the worst part is even the gurus and the people who are supposed to be the educators, who are supposed to be teaching people how to actually start businesses, even they don't talk about it, right? They don't educate anybody about it. They just say, hey, yeah, go talk to a lawyer. Just go talk to an accountant. And it's like, okay, yeah, because I got 100 of those in my phone that I can just call up that are my best friends, right? Of course not. And so unfortunately, I would say not even the gurus or the education providers have taken the time to actually go out there and simplify these concepts for their students and for the people that they are serving. And then the other point that's very important to understand about this is that we're going to go ahead and sure, we would still recommend that you're going to talk to a lawyer. I'm going to have the training disclaimer that we'll talk about in just a second. But the point is that this is not to replace a professional, right? To go through these trainings that you're about to go through right now is so that way you are educated and empowered to actually understand what is going on, okay? Because when you talk to the professional, either they don't explain it properly, because a lot of times, even when I go and talk to the accountant or the lawyer, they're so much in their jargon, they're so much living in their world where they're not explaining the actual topics properly, which is unfortunate. And so no one is explaining these topics, right? And so unfortunately, this is such a painful topic for new business owners that what we decided to do was in this newest revamped version of this program, the one that you're in, we have decided that we're going to basically do what no other education program that we have seen ever actually does, which is we're going to answer this for you once and for all in as simple language as possible. Because by the end of this training, like I said, you will know and have the understanding that you need in your business to have it fully registered with, in an upcoming training, we'll talk about the business bank account, all open A to Z. How cool is that going to be? It's going to be very cool. So stick with us. And that's kind of the introduction that I wanted to walk you through in this training. Let's get into the actual training disclaimer. I want to make this very clear from the very beginning as well. This is the training disclaimer. We, our holding company, DBAs, we are not providing tax, legal, or accounting advice. We are not tax, legal, or accounting professionals. What we're about to go through is just for general knowledge and information purposes only, okay? It's not meant to be taken as tax, legal, or accounting advice. All we're going to be doing is providing you examples and illustrations to be able to go ahead and explain these topics, which again is for you to be empowered so that way you are actually educated. You are not stuck to the hip of somebody else in which you've gone ahead and said, hey, you know what? I don't know anything. I'm just going to go ahead and be in for the ride. You want to be empowered so you have the skills for the rest of your career as a business owner, which is probably going to be a very long time. So that way you can actually still consult those advisors that are in your life. But on top of that, if you don't have your own tax and legal advisor, don't worry. Towards the end of this training, we will be recommending some different options for you as well, okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the very first topic of this, which is going to be the two types of legal entities. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to go ahead and zoom out, okay? So we're going to go ahead and get our head above the water, right? So imagine you are like this eagle. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just zoom out and really kind of get an overview. And then towards the second half of this training, we're going to go ahead and become like this eagle and get into the trenches, okay? We're going to go ahead and put in the work and tactically get all the pieces of this set up. But for right now, and the next couple training sections, we're going to be zooming out and understanding the foundational pieces of this. Got it? Does that make sense? Beautiful. Let's go ahead and dive right into the overall understanding of legal entities. Now, it sounds complex. It sounds kind of like fancy schmancy, but stick with me here. It's going to be very easy, okay? So there are 5 main legal entities for the purposes of doing business in the United States. Now, we're going to talk about Canada later on in this training. For right now, we're going to be talking about the United States. And even for you Canadian students, do not skip this. I'm telling you, this is going to be very important because the Canadian system works very similarly to the US system, just a little bit more simplified. But even then, if you're only going to be doing business in Canada, it doesn't matter. It's worth for you to understand the US system because there's a lot of opportunity for those people who can understand how the US system actually works. Okay, so there are 5 main legal entities. There's a sole prop, there's partnership, there's LLC, there's S Corp, and there is C Corp. Now, again, remember, you do not need to memorize this. We're just marinating you in this, okay? You're kind of just imagine there's a bath, and all you're doing is you're listening to my words, and they're going into your ears, and they might stick and they might not stick. It doesn't matter. You're just marinating in it, okay? So this is the visual. We got the sole prop, we got the partnership, we got the LLC, we got the S Corp, and we have the C Corp, okay? Again, all of this is fancy schmancy language for you right now. Don't worry. We're going to go ahead and dive into that even more. Let me give you just a quick overview just so you understand, okay? A sole prop is going to be a one-person business. It's not something you have to register. We'll talk about that in a little bit. A partnership is basically when 2 people are doing businesses. They are legally, automatically a partnership, regardless of if they register or not. Now, a partnership in this capacity is not the way that we recommend it. We'll talk about how to actually run a partnership later on. And LLC stands for a limited liability company. It is one of the newer corporate structures. It is very flexible. We will talk about that in depth later on. And S Corp stands for a small business corporation. It is a pass-through entity. Again, you don't have to know what that means. But again, just kind of overall understanding. And then a C Corp stands for a big corporation, Chapter C of the IRS code. And it's because it has, typically when you think of those big companies that are stock market and board of directors, they are normally a C Corp. Cool. So we got 5 entities. Beautiful. We've marinated in it. Hey, what is next? Well, let me go ahead and really simplify this to you and really just go ahead and say that, hey, you know what? Instead of remembering 5 things, you know what's easier? Remembering 2 things. And so out of these 5 legal entities, what ends up happening is that there are 2 of them that are not corporations, and there are 3 of them that are corporations, okay? So this fancy language right here, unincorporated and incorporated, all that means is that this is not a corporation. It's still a legal entity for the purposes of doing business, but it is just not a corporation legal entity. And then these 3 over here are corporation legal entities, okay? So the 2 that are not corporations are a sole prop and a partnership, okay? And then an incorporated entity would be an LLC, an S Corp, and a C Corp. And so whenever anybody says, hey, are you a corporation? What they are asking is, hey, are you an LLC, an S Corp, or a C Corp? Now, as you're going to learn later on, the term business, this is all business right here, okay? And so you can do business even without being a corporation. And so sometimes I know a lot of people confuse the word business with corporation. Those are 2 different things. We'll talk about that more in a little bit in an upcoming training section. But what you want to understand is that you can actually run a business without being a corporation, or you can be a corporation and run a business too. Both apply because all 5 of these legal entity types are possible to do business. And so when we say in this training, right, the training title here, 2 types of legal entities, this is what we are talking about. This is what you want to remember because this is the foundation that we're going to build on for the upcoming training sections, okay? So we have unincorporated, which is not corporation legal entity types, and we have corporation legal entity types. In the next couple training sections, we are going to now then dive into what are the differences between these 2, right? Like, hey, what is the benefits of these and what is the benefits of these? What is the benefits of a corporation? What is the benefits of a sole prop, right? These are all tools in your tool belt that you can better understand when to use, why to use, and all of that kind of stuff, okay? So like I said, in the next couple of training sections, we will be going ahead and diving into the difference between both of these. And so the biggest way that I want you to understand how we're going to be kind of laying out the upcoming couple trainings is by understanding that it's layers of learning. This is the difference between how we structure our program and how I think many other people who are out there who just maybe read a book on it, or maybe they're really good at even running businesses, but they're not good at the education piece of it, right? This is very important to understand. Because we are educators, because we have been in the space of understanding how education works, not only have we done and actually practically have experience with what we are teaching, but we also understand how to teach it because those are 2 different skill sets. And so what you're going to be learning over the next couple training sections is we're going to be building different layers, okay? So this first layer that we talked about was just understanding, hey, there are some entities that are non-corporations and there are some entities that are corporations. Beautiful. Even though this says layer number 1, Really, layer one is like right over here, okay? And then inside of this beginner layer, we're gonna have multiple different layers that we're gonna go ahead and build on over the next couple training sections. And then the second half of this training, which is gonna be a training section much later on, we're gonna then be saying, cool, you got the foundational layers of learning. Now let's go ahead and actually start taking action, okay? So that's what I want you to kind of just remember. Every single training, we're gonna be going a little bit more advanced, kind of just stretching your understanding of it, kind of ratcheting up slowly, the advanced level of this, so that way you can build your skill, because this is a skill. Legal, accounting, all of this finance is a skill. And what is the definition of a skill in our definition? It's knowledge times reps. And so via these trainings, you are getting the knowledge, and then you're going to be putting in the reps of applying that knowledge, thereby increasing your skill. And so right now, before you started this, you're like, you know what? You were unconsciously incompetent. You didn't even know how little you knew, okay? You didn't even know how much there was out there and how little of it you actually knew. Versus now, you're going to slowly start to become consciously incompetent. You're going to start to become aware of like, oh man, this entire ecosystem of like legal and finance, there's so much more to this than I even thought. And that's why it's a valley of despair, because people start to realize how much they don't actually know. But then if you stick with it, the more knowledge you get, the more reps you get with that knowledge, you become consciously competent, right? You actually can become competent if you really try. And then you attain levels of mastery in which you're unconsciously competent. You don't even have to try, and you already know all of this, okay? So this is the layers of learning that we are going to be walking you through step by step through the upcoming training sections. Just remember, I'm going to say this one more time because it's very important, is that we are going to be working on getting you through this quickly, okay? So yes, I know some of the trainings that are upcoming might be a little bit longer, but you can use this playback speeds to go a little bit faster. Don't skip them. But the point is that regardless of if you have your corporation or not, we want to make this as easy and as simple as possible for you so you can get this process started. I know it's annoying to have to do this, right? But the point is that it's important, right? This is how you do business right. This is how the professional entrepreneurs do it, because they understand that, hey, if we do things right the first time, they're going to be right for the history of our business. And so what we're going to do is, after having done this thousands of times, we're not going to have you sitting around for a bunch of time, right? There's going to be a little bit of sitting around for the next couple of training sections, but then after that, we're going to keep you moving so that way you can go ahead and get those basics set up, and then you can go on and move into getting your business website set up, your new client agreement. Because what's going to happen is, in the background, it is going to take a few days or sometimes even a few weeks to get some of this set up. So as you get that into motion, you'll be able to go ahead and start focusing on the other important business basics for your business. Okay. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this has been this training on the 2 types of legal entities and really setting the foundation of what is going to be upcoming in the next couple training sections. So don't skip them. We will catch you in the next couple training sections to go over the foundational frameworks of understanding legal entities, and then eventually getting to which one is going to be important for you. So with that being said, we will catch you in the next training section. All right, team, welcome to this training in which we are going to be talking about the sole proprietorship, okay, or sole prop for short. Now, if you remember from the previous training section, we did say that this is the first legal entity that is needed to be understood in order to actually do business, okay? Now, this is in the category of not being a corporation, okay? So sole proprietorship, sometimes also called sole prop for short. I'll be honest, I almost always call it a sole prop because it is much easier to say. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do, and like we've talked about in the previous training section as well, is that what we are doing here is we're building your understanding layer by layer by layer. Okay, so the very first couple training sections in this training as a whole are going to be a little bit easier to wrap your head around, and then we're going to slowly start ratcheting up the more advanced level as we start to get over here, so that way you can get to the point of becoming an action taker. Okay, so we're layering your understanding of these concepts. Okay, now the other topic I want to go ahead and talk about is right over here when we talk about the non-corporations, right? So the entities, the legal entities that are not corporations that you can do business with. The reason why we are not talking about partnerships here is because of the fact that for most people when they're starting out, they are not starting as a partnership, number one. And then number two is that there are better ways to actually structure a partnership using LLCs and corporations, which we'll talk about in a separate training section. And so that's the reason why for right now, we are going to be focusing on the sole prop, because for, I would say 80% plus, 90% plus of the people who are just getting started in business, that is going to be the legal entity that is going to be most relevant. Okay, so let's go ahead and define terms here. The word sole prop, okay, sole Sole means one. Proprietorship literally means owner of a business, right? So literally, the word sole prop literally means one man or one woman business, okay? So what most people, and this is very important to understand, what most people don't know is that in order to open or become a sole prop, there is no paperwork needed. There's literally no steps required. In fact, the government makes it very easy to actually be a sole prop. How? By literally making it so that everyone, no matter, I guess if you're over the age of 18, that's really kind of the requirement. Everyone is by default already a sole prop. And so as soon as you generate a single dollar in any way, shape, or form that is outside of your normal 9-to-5 job, right, which is your W-2 tax return. Okay, so again, if you don't need to know that, this is just going to be something that you marinate in. It's going to kind of become second nature to you. It's like, okay, 9-to-5 job, when I work as an employee, that's my W-2. Okay, W-2 is the tax form. Okay, so as soon as you generate a single dollar outside of your 9-to-5 job, congratulations. By default, automatically, you are now a sole prop. There are no fees. There's no startup costs. There's no formal process. You can literally go out and sign up a new customer, a new client, a new student today. You can start making money. You can start actually taking out business deductions. You can start getting business write-offs right this second without even having to register or anything like that. And guess what? This is fully encouraged by the government. This is not something that is like, hey, this is some shady under the cover kind of stuff we're talking about. This is absolutely encouraged by the government. Think about how cool that is, right? Now, here's our meme cat. Coach, what are you saying? Yes, you heard me. Everyone has made it so complicated, right? Especially when you think about, I got to start a business. I got to, maybe start a corporation. how do I do all this stuff, right? They've made it so complicated, and probably because lawyers and accountants actually make money when more people are confused. And in reality, a lot of this stuff is basic foundational understanding, which you're understanding now as you go through these business basics, right? And so everyone thinks that they have to register their business, when in reality, the government makes it very, very, very easy to actually start a business and get started. Literally, it's as simple as you're already in business. Congratulations. Think about how easy that is, right? And now some questions that might come up is like, hey, does that mean that I can go out and open a business bank account as a sole prop also? Guess what? The answer to that is, yep. All you got to do is you just bring over your social security number and you can actually open up a business bank account. And so this is where a lot of people get confused or they don't understand, is that a business is independent of whether it is a corporation or not, right? So the business, you can run a business as a sole prop. You can run a business as a partnership. You can run a business through a corporation like an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp, right? So the business is already established. It's just a matter of you generating the money, right? Now, whether or not you decide to run the business through a corporation, now that is a whole separate story that we're going to be walking you through and establishing those layers for, right? And so yes, you can open a business bank account at your local bank, right? As a sole prop using your social security number. And then you can start to keep your business revenue and your expenses separate from your personal, right? So you can literally go today and have a business up and running. Now, should you do that? Is that the best scenario for you? That's exactly what we're going to be talking about in upcoming sections. But this is why I just want to kind of break those beliefs that a lot of people misunderstand about some of the foundational fundamentals when it comes to business, right? Now, here's another one, which is, hey, can I take business deductions? Can I take business write-offs as a sole prop also? And the answer to that, guess what, is yes. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, a tax write-off is any business expense that is allowed by the IRS for the purposes of lowering your taxable income. Okay, so a tax write-off is also known as a business or a tax deduction. So basically anything with an asterisk, I'll explain what that asterisk is in just a second. So basically anything purchased by your business in the course of running your business to try and make a profit, that can actually be deducted from your taxes. How cool is that? Now, this is one of the ways that business owners are actually able to go ahead and do a lot of different write-offs when they are doing things for the purposes of their business. And so this is actually one of the strategies that can be utilized. And so again, like I was explaining, was that your business is independent of whether or not you're doing it through a corporation or not. You as a sole prop, if you wanted to, which again, I'm not saying that's a recommendation. We'll talk about what the recommendation is going to be later on, right? And we're going to go ahead and make general understandings of what we would do. But I'm just making it clear, it's like, yes, even as a sole prop, you can actually go out and get business deductions. Now, anything here refers to anything that is allowed by the IRS, right? So it's not just like willy-nilly, like I'm just going to go buy my groceries as a business deduction or something, right? No, it doesn't work like that. There are rules around this, but if you've ever heard of any business owner who's like, boasting or really proud for like, yeah, you know what? I can buy this. It's a business deduction, right? Pens, pencils, computer that you're going to use for the purposes of business, right? Microphones, softwares, education, all of these things, right? Can be business deductions, right? And so that's what we're talking about, right? From the revenue that you generate as a sole prop, you can deduct things like office supplies, office equipment, education, softwares, any professional services. So let's say, for example, you get legal, accounting, bookkeeping services, advertising costs, home office. So you can actually write off a percentage of your phone bill, your internet, your electricity, even your rent if you are working from home, right? All of this can be a business deduction in order to lower your taxable income. Anything that you can think of that is an expense that you would have as a result of running your business, most probably it is going to be a tax deduction or tax deductible. You just have to make sure through the IRS website, which is very easy to do, it's just a Google search away, and then you can see what qualifies, and you just have to make sure that you save your receipts, so that way you have all of those when you do your tax filings, right? So yes, even with the sole prop, which is literally by default, anybody who generates a single dollar outside of their W-2 9 to 5 is automatically a sole prop, you can have business deductions even without having a corporation. Think about how cool that is, right? You do not need a corporation in order to be able to start taking advantage of tax deductions because you can do it via a sole prop. Now, there are cons to a sole prop. There are more advantages to a corporation that we're going to talk about, but those corporation advantages also come with additional costs. And so you got to weigh the pros and cons, and that's why we're establishing your understanding of this, so that way you are actually educated on what is the right decision that is best for you and your circumstance and your situation. But if anybody tells you that, hey, you got to do all this complicated stuff in order to start business, like they are just getting in their own way, they're tripping over themselves. Literally getting into business is literally as simple as going out and making money. That's it. Okay. Now, a lot of people are like, yo, what's going on here? Like, why is this? This is a trick. Like, why would the IRS or the government allow this all to literally happen without even you having to register? Okay. And the answer to that is because the government wants you to report all of your income. Okay. They don't want people doing money laundering and hiding their income and all that kind of stuff, right? And so if the government put fees or registrations in place in order for you to be able to go out and make money outside of your W-2, okay, then people would, you know what they would do? They would go out and still make the money on the side. But then when tax time came, they'd be like, oh, dang, you know what? I didn't register. So that way I'm not going to report it, right? Because they weren't registered. And so instead of that happening, the government, they understand this because, hey, if there's one thing the government's good at, the government is good at getting its money, which is its tax money, right? And so the government has created literally the lowest barrier to make money outside of your W-2 day job. So that way you don't have to feel bad about reporting everything that you made. And so what is that lower barrier? What is the lowest barrier that they've established? Nothing. Like there's no barrier for you to actually just go out there and by default, automatically, you are a sole prop. Okay. And so I cannot tell you how much I wish when we were first starting out, a training like this existed that would explain to us very simply all of the things that are fears when we're first starting out in business, right? We're like, how does this work? What is this? All these complications. It's literally this simple. Okay. So when tax time comes, because there is no fee or registration process, you're able to go ahead and report your income from your side business very, very easily. Okay. So when it comes to comparing this to a corporation, this is what it actually looks like so far. This is the table. Okay. And so right now, from what it looks like, the sole prop looks so much better than a corporation because here's the thing. So a sole prop, it's unincorporated. That means that it's free. Okay. Versus a corporation, you have to actually register it. So it's going to actually cost $300 to $800, right? Maybe yearly. But can you open a business bank account with the sole prop? Yes. Can you do that with the corporation? Obviously, yes. Do you get business deductions and write-offs with a sole prop? Yes. And you also get it with the corporation. And so based off of this table alone, based off of these three factors, you're like, yo, wait a second. Sole prop is the way to go. Like, this is amazing. It's free. I get a business bank account and I get business deductions. Like, how much better can I get? Why in the world would anyone ever pay to actually become incorporated? Why would anyone actually pay in order to actually go ahead and become a corporation, right? Like, what's the catch? Should I just go right now, coach, and become a sole prop and that's it? hold your horses, okay? Because yes, right now, a sole prop based off of where we are in your layer of understanding, right? Because remember, we're layering your learning of this. Right now, it's like, yo, it makes no sense. I'm never going to establish myself as a corporation. But that's exactly why in the next training section, we're now going to go ahead and go to the next layer of your understanding as we get more and more advanced, because this is how true learning happens, for you to understand, hey, what is the actual benefit of a corporation? Why would somebody decide to start off as a corporation? What are some of the advantages of a corporation? Okay, so this specific training section has been about the sole prop. We've talked about exactly how it works, a lot of the miscommunication or misunderstandings or wrong beliefs or limiting beliefs that people have when it comes to starting business. And now we're going to go ahead and work our way into the next training section that's going to walk you through another layer of understanding this entire topic of corporations, which is, hey, what are the benefits of a corporation? So with that being said, we will catch you in the next training section. All right, team, welcome back to this training. Inside of this training section, we are going to be double clicking into corporations and understanding, hey, why do people spend money to register corporations? Because in the previous training section, we talked about the sole prop. If you haven't watched that one, make sure that you are following along. It's very important that you do these trainings in order because there is a method to the madness. So in the previous training section, we went ahead and talked about like, hey, with a sole prop, you can pretty much, hey, it's free to set up. You can have a business bank account. You can take advantage of business write-offs and deductions. So then why even register for a dang corporation, right? Why would anybody even pay the money to do that? And so, yes, there are a lot of things that you can do with a sole prop, but there are, more importantly, things that you can do with a corporation that you cannot do with a sole prop. And so the two big reasons why corporations are useful is because of protection, aka protection liability, right? And tax savings. So that's exactly what we're going to go ahead and double click into. So that way, again, we're layering your understanding here. You will, by the end of this training section, understand, okay, hey, this is where the tool, because that's all these things are, right? These legal entities are tools. A sole prop is a tool. There's a time and place to be a sole prop, but there's a time and place where you don't be a sole prop. And so you will understand where the tool of being a corporation actually comes in handy. So let's go ahead and talk about reason numero uno, which is protection and liability. Okay, so this is the first big reason why people spend money and time to actually register and open a corporation. And that is that it protects you legally from liability, okay? Why? Because what happens is that in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of the law, a corporation is actually seen as a separate entity, meaning it's kind of like a separate person, okay? And the crazy thing about it is that in the United States, every single person gets their own social security number. Well, corporations, because in the eyes of the law are basically separate entities, separate people almost, okay? They get their own equivalent to a social security number, which is called an EIN, which is an employer identification number from the IRS, okay? So they are registered separate from you. So in the same way that maybe when you go to the doctor's office or when you kind of register for like a credit card or you register for a phone bill or something, you use your social security number, right, to be able to do that. When you do things for the purposes of a business, there is now a separation between you, your social security number, and your EIN, which is your actual corporation's kind of social security number, right? It's the identification number for a corporation. So visually, this is what that entire thing looks like, right? So for entities that are not incorporated, right? So for sole props and partnerships, there is no separation of liability. What that means is that the owner's personal assets, their own debts, are the same as the business's assets and the business's debts, okay? There is no separation between the two. However, for corporations like LLCs, S Corps, C Corps, again, you don't have to know the difference between these right now. We'll talk about that later on. But what you want to understand is that for this group, which is the corporation group, there is a separation for the liability purposes. So that means that the owner of the corporation, who has their own debts, their own assets, if they get sued personally, XYZ, that is on the personal side. And then the business has its own assets, its own debts, its own liabilities. So that way, if it gets sued, they can't come after your personal car and all that kind of stuff, right? They can only go after the things that are within the business. Versus on a sole prop side of things, right? For those that are not registered as a corporation, both are actually the same. Does that make sense? I hope that's clear. Again, we've spent so much time thinking about how to explain this, the visuals, the team spent so much time to make this. Again, I wish that we had a training like this when we first started out in business to be able to simply explain it to us to understand exactly how all of this works. Okay, so that's what we went ahead and talked about right over here. You can pause and read it if you'd like, but I'll read it for you over here. In an unincorporated entity, that is basically not a corporation, there is no separation between your personal assets and debts and the business assets and debt. That's exactly what I said. And then in a corporation entity, there is a separation between the business and the personal side of things. And so this is what we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen, as the first reason why a corporation is very helpful. Because in a sole prop, even though it does not require for you to register, even though you can have a business bank account, even though you can get business tax deductions and all that kind of stuff, in a sole prop, the con of a sole prop is that if you get sued, you would still be liable personally. Okay. Now, does that mean that it makes and breaks, like it just breaks the entire thing, like nobody should ever be a sole prop? No, because like we said, these are all tools, right? In the same way you have a screwdriver, you have a hammer, right? You have these different tools, and then you're going to need these different tools for different purposes. And so for some people, in certain circumstances, in certain situations, it does make sense to be a sole prop. And again, we will go ahead and talk about those scenarios and for who the sole prop is going to make sense for and who it's going to make more sense to actually go ahead and register as a corporation, okay? And so this is the first reason why corporations are beneficial, even though they do cost time, they do cost money, even though they do cost attention in order to actually go and incorporate, is because of the fact that they do provide that protection from liability. Okay, so as we look at our chart over here, right, we look at our kind of table. And so we were previously in the previous training section, we were only looking up until here, right? And up until here, you're like, yo, this sole prop thing, this is the way to go. This partnership, kind of no incorporation, that is the thing we should do all the way, right? Because it has all the benefits without any of the costs. But now as we add another variable, as we add another factor, which is liability, you'll see that we do get that X over here on the sole prop. And so the corporation is starting to win a little bit more to say, you know what? That cost might be justified in the right circumstance because of the fact that if liability is actually a thing, okay? Now, that is the first reason why corporations are useful, is because of protection and liability. The second reason that we're going to go ahead and talk about now is tax savings. So this is the second big reason why people spend money to register and open a corporation in order to save on taxes. Now, we're not going to go into tax law right now. That's going to be something that we talk about when we talk about tax and legal mastery. So that's a whole separate course. Once you get a little bit more advanced, we can start to build your understanding of tax and legal mastery. Okay. However, I do want to just go ahead and little bit sprinkle, kind of marinate your mind in this understanding of self-employment tax. Okay, so we already talked about business deductions and tax deductions. That is separate. Okay, we're not talking about that right now. We've already talked about how both a sole prop and a corporation have access to that, right? But what we're talking about here is something called self-employment tax. This is something completely different than the business deduction stuff that we talked about, which is like, oh, I spent money on education, I spent money on software, I spent money on notebooks and stuff like that. That's a business deduction. Both sole props and corporations have that. But when we talk about self-employment tax is the part of your taxes that is paid towards Social Security and Medicare. Now, if you don't know what that is, okay, Social Security is a program by the federal government that way when you actually retire, there's actually some money that goes in there, right? So you pay into a pool and then it goes ahead and funds the people who need Social Security right now. And Medicare is also for healthcare later on as well. Okay, so that is the kind of pool that we're talking about when we talk about self-employment tax. And again, don't worry, I'm keeping it extremely high level. We're just kind of layering this in. We're not going to talk about all of the different types of taxes. Again, we will talk about that when we talk about tax and legal mastery. But for right now, you just want to understand that there are three main types of tax, okay? So what you do is you have your income. Let's say, for example, you make, let's say like 75K a year or 100K a year or whatever, right? Whatever that number is. And then out of that, there's then going to come Social Security and Medicare tax, and I'll break this down in just a second and all the percentages, okay? Then you have federal income tax based off of what tax bracket you are in. And then if you live in a state that has state income tax, which there are, majority of the states do have state income tax, but there's some states that don't, all of these are going to come minus, minus, minus out of your income, okay? However, we are not talking about these right now. We are specifically focusing on Social Security and Medicare tax, okay? Now, some people, when they hear this, they'll be like, you know what? Coach, I already got this covered. My 9 to 5, my W-2, it already pays on my behalf from my paycheck, the Social Security and Medicare tax. I do not have to worry about this. Yes, that's probably true. But the thing is, you're going through business basics right now, right? You're learning what it means to be a professional entrepreneur, a professional business owner. So for a business owner, it's actually quite different, because when you have a W-2 from your 9 to 5 day job, what happens is that the company that is your employer actually pays for half of the Social Security and Medicare tax. Okay, so let's break down these percentages so you can understand what all this looks like. Okay, and again, don't get overwhelmed. Trust me, we're just marinating this. This might go over your head a little bit, but you'll be able to come back and refer to this over and over and over again. And I promise you, eventually, as you start to become more and more of a professional business owner, you're going to start to get this more and more, okay? Is that Social Security tax is 12.4%, okay? And Medicare tax is 2.9%. That's how much comes out of your paycheck, okay? Now, when you have a 9 to 5, a W-2, what happens is that out of your paycheck, your employer, instead of your company, I should put your employer here, right? So your employer pays 6.2%, and you pay 6.2% out of your paycheck, okay? Same thing with Medicare tax, 2.9%. Half of it is half of it is paid for by your employer, and then you, out of your paycheck, pay the other half of it. And so visually, this is what it looks like. So hypothetically, let's say, for example, your pre-tax earnings before tax, right, your EBT, is $75,000, okay? This is your employee salary income. Now, what's going to happen is that you are going to have Social Security tax, which is 12.4%, okay? Your company or your employer pays 6.2%, you pay 6.2%. Medicare tax, right? Half the employer pays, you pay the other half. And so therefore, your total tax adds up to 15.3% for Social Security, Medicare. And then the company, your employer that you work for, pays this much, and then you pay this much. So what's the actual numbers, not the percentages, right? So on 75,000, theoretically, just kind of doing some back of the napkin math here, you would pay $5,700 in Social Security and Medicare tax, theoretically on paper, for $75,000 in earnings before tax. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to go back over here so you can remember this. That is not the total tax, right? Because that is only just one bucket of the taxes. Out of that, you will then have to further pay federal income tax and then state income tax, okay? We're only specifically focusing right now on Social Security and Medicare tax, okay? So you're following along with me right now. We're only focusing on this, and you understand that from your W-2 9 to 5, your employer is paying half of that, you are paying half of that. Now, you might see where I'm going with this is because now as a business owner, what happens? You don't have an employer, right? And so this is where the sole prop is at a disadvantage when it comes to that Social Security and Medicare tax. Why is that the case? Because when you are a sole prop, okay, when you're a sole prop, you are now both the employee and the employer, right? So in the previous example, where you have your 9 to 5 W-2, you have an employer, right? You're hired by a company. And so this is why I kind of laugh sometimes when people are like, hey, business owners, they're robbing people. Well, hey, the truth is business owners, they don't always have the best end of the stick if they don't know what the heck they're doing. Yes, they are able to go ahead and work with the system and use it for their benefit if they know what they are doing, which is the reason why you're going through this business basics course and to understand the foundations. So that way you can be one of those business owners who is smart, because you're understanding now the second reason why corporations are beneficial is because if you're a sole prop, you are having to be both the employee and the employer, right? And so what that means now is that you have to pay both sides of the equation. You have to pay the 7.65% that your employer would pay, and you have to pay the 7.65% that normally you would pay. And so then when you have a sole prop, what happens is that instead of calling it Social Security and Medicare tax, if you hear the word self-employment tax, right? And they'll say that it's 15.3%, that is what they are referring to. How do you get 15.3%? It's 7.65 plus 7.65, right? Both sides of the equation that normally the employer would have paid, because you are having to pay both of them, they then change the term to now becoming self-employment tax. Does that make sense, right? We're just making it very, very simple. Again, if it doesn't make sense, just replay the last couple minutes. It will make a lot more sense to you, right? So normally, I'm going to repeat this again, the employer would pay half and you would pay half, but because of the fact that you are now a sole prop, if you decide to be a sole prop, right, this is what it would actually look like, where you now have to pay both sides. And so you pay the 12.4% of the Social Security tax and you pay the 2.9% of the Medicare tax. These are now called self-employment tax because you are a sole prop. And so on that same $75,000 of income, okay, so 75K, before you were paying $5,700 in Social Security Medicare tax. Now, because you have to pay both sides, you are paying $11,000 in total Social Security Medicare tax, which is now called self-employment tax. Ouch, right? You're actually paying double the tax that a 9-to-5 W-2 employee would have to pay on the same amount of income because of the fact that if you were a novice business owner, you didn't understand how this worked, you didn't understand how to save on taxes, you didn't understand that, you were a sole prop, come tax time, guess what? That is now an additional $5,700. How much could you do with $5,700? That's a pretty substantial amount, right? That is an additional $5,700 that you now have to pay in taxes because of the fact that you were not equipped in understanding how this entire game is played. Okay. And so this is what we're talking about when we talk about corporations. How does a corporation save you on taxes? Because what happens is that when you have a corporation, okay, when you have a corporation, you tell the IRS, let's say hypothetically, let's just use an example. I'm going to use the S Corp as an example. It doesn't matter which one you use, but we're going to have a whole separate training section about LLC. So for right now, I'm just going to talk about the S Corp. Okay. What you do is you tell the IRS, hey, I am an S Corp. Okay. So therefore, Mr. IRS, Mrs. IRS, we are now going to divide our business profit, okay, into owner's distributions and employee salary income. And then what happens is you only have to pay the self-employment tax on the employee salary income part of the profits, okay? Now, I'm saying a bunch of words. You're like, okay, this is going over my head. Wait a second, stick with me. Let me go ahead and show you a visual example. Okay, so this is what it looks like. You have your S Corp, okay? And so then you have the same $75,000 that we've been talking about. However, you now get to decide come tax time, hey, and there's not just come tax time, there's obviously throughout the year, you're kind of doing tax planning as well. But what you're doing is you're now saying, cool, I'm going to have 50,000 of that be owner's distribution. And I'm going to have 25,000 of that be employee salary income. Okay. And so that same 75,000 now got broken up because you can divide it because there's now a separation. There's actually two tax returns that's being filed. Okay. And then on the owner's distribution side of things, okay, on that 50K, you pay 0% in Social Security and 0% in Medicare. And you only pay that self-employment tax, that Social Security tax, that Medicare tax, both sides of it, on the 25,000. Okay, so now let's see what the numbers and the math actually break up to, right? So let me scroll down a little bit so you can see here is that the self-employment tax on the 50K, that is $0. And then the 15.3% of 25,000, guess what? You only pay now $3,800 in self-employment tax, okay? So now, check this out. I'm going to go ahead and put everything together so you can see how this all breaks down, right? So in your W-2 9-to-5, on $75,000 in income, you would pay $5,700 in Social Security Medicare tax, okay? But then if a sole prop, because you didn't know what you were doing, you didn't understand the benefits of a corporation, $75,000, you pay $11,000 in self-employment tax, aka Social Security Medicare tax, both sides of it, right? But then if you're savvy and you understand how this game works, guess what you can do? You can actually go ahead and split it up because you have a corporation. And now guess what? You only pay $3,800 in self-employment and Medicare tax, which is actually lower than what you would even pay if you were a W-2 9-to-5 employee. Are you starting to see how this game works? Are you starting to kind of understand the second major reason why corporations are helpful? Is based off of whatever that income is, right? So this example I'm giving you is for 75,000. This is where it depends. And when we get to the scenarios, you'll understand a little bit more, is that obviously if over here, this is like, let's say it's only 10,000. Well, if you run the numbers, the additional cost of having a corporation may not be worth it at 10,000, right? So there's a line of which, you know what? It makes more sense because I'm going to save in taxes based off of the income that I'm going to have inside of the corporation versus it might actually be better for you to stay a sole prop based off of how much money you generate in your business. It all just depends. And again, we're going to go over those options and what that line is. But for right now, we're just layering your understanding of, okay, wow, there is this whole other department, a different understanding of what is the benefit of a corporation. And now you've seen it right here with the benefit of an S Corp. Okay. Now there's an additional tax deductions and all this stuff that comes with corporations. I'm not talking about that right now. We're simply only talking about the self-employment tax. Now, another question that somebody might have is, hey, coach, why did you use the S Corp in the example? Why didn't you just use the LLC? Because we've heard a lot about LLCs. Like, why not use the LLC as the example for the tax deduction? And we're going to have a whole separate section on this. But the reason is because an LLC can kind of be confusing because it can kind of, based off of the taxes, can either be a sole prop or a corporation for tax purposes. Did I just blow your brain? Don't worry about it. We'll have a whole separate section where we're going to talk about it. So for right now, just disregard the LLC. I had to use the S Corp as the example in order for you to be able to understand this. Okay. So again, you can pause, you can go back, you can better understand this because I'm telling you, this is just basic fundamental understanding for you as a business owner. And literally we are talking about the number one expense that you are going to have in business is going to be taxes. Okay. And so it's worth for you to understand this. This is not tax advice. It's worth for you to understand this so that way when you do go meet with an accountant or a professional, you actually have a foundational understanding to even ask them questions. Say, hey, I learned this. Can you explain this further to me, right? So you understand what's going on here. Is this making sense? Yes, coach. Hopefully that's what you're saying, right? Yes, coach. My eyes have been opened to more about this game when it comes to corporations. Okay. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the two big reasons why corporations are useful because of protection and liability. We talked about that, right? So with a corporation, you have that separation between yourself and the business, right? And then also the tax savings. Specifically, we talked about the Social Security and Medicare tax and the self-employment tax that is saved once you are actually a corporation with the proper tax filing. Now, you will see, I was not joking when I said that there are layers to your understanding, right? You started off this earlier training, you're like, oh, hey, you know what? 2 types of legal entities, or learning about sole prop. You're like, yo, this is beginner stuff. I get this. And then, boom. We just went ahead and increased the layers of understanding and learning that are going on here, right? So it's just a skill, knowledge times reps. Again, you're getting the knowledge right now. You're being marinated in this. And so it's going to seem a little bit overwhelming in the beginning because of the fact that this is the first time that you are being exposed to this. And so for anybody who's like, yo, holy moly, my brain is on fire, okay? I know. Trust me, we were there. We all started in the same place. Nobody was born knowing any of this, right? For God's sake, I know for a fact nobody was born knowing tax and accounting law, okay? But I promise you, the more you get exposed to this over time, the more multiple repetitions that you have, it will become easier, right? It's going to take at least 10 or 20 reps of you being exposed to these concepts regarding corporations and legal entities and taxes and all this stuff to wrap your head around it. But again, just like the first time you got exposed to riding a bike or driving a car or tying your shoes, there was a lot of things to remember, right? I remember the first time I was learning how to drive a car, I had to look at the mirror and then also turn lanes and put the indicator. It was overwhelming, right? I definitely almost hit a bunch of cars when I was turning lanes for the first time, right? Maybe you are in the same boat as well. The point is that in the beginning, it feels like your brain is working overtime to try and remember all the small things. But then the more you do it, it becomes effortless. That's why we call it the skills curve, right? So in the beginning, you're unconsciously incompetent. You don't even know how bad you are incompetent. But then what these trainings are doing is they're making you conscious of your incompetence. They are exposing the deficit in your knowledge of what you don't understand, what you don't actually know. But then the more reps you get with the knowledge, right? The more conscious you become and the more competent you become. And then you can get to the point where you are unconsciously competent. You can literally do it in your sleep. And now you are competent, a professional, and you are attaining levels of mastery. Okay. So with enough repetition, I promise you, you will get a hang of this. And the good news for your level of income right now as a beginner, you do not have to be a master of this stuff, okay? All you got to do is just be familiar with this stuff. You just got to know it exists. You got to just know where to find the training for your reference, right? And then again, like I said, as you start to get past $10,000 plus per month, then you can start to get literally more advanced into the tax and legal mastery side of things. But for this right now, these upcoming training sections that we're walking you through are going to be more than enough for you to be able to get those initial foundations and understand where you need to go. So you can actually focus on the very important things, which is actually generating money, right? So you don't want to get stuck with this stuff to the point where you're just worried about all this all the time and then you're not actually generating any money. And so that's why I do want to go ahead and remind you one more time, we are going to go through this a lot quicker. Okay. So compared to like if this was going to be like a tax and legal course by itself, obviously we'd spend so much more time diving deeper into it, but we're going to go faster through it because our goal is to get you the foundational knowledge so that way you can get to the tactical side of the corporation, get it started, get it in the background so you can get started on your business website, your new client agreement. You can get started with marketing and sales and getting new clients and all of that kind of stuff while this corporation stuff happens in the background. Okay. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this has been this training that went ahead and talked to you about the major benefits of corporations. Up next, we're going to go ahead and explain LLCs because those are very different than what we have spoken about thus far, and they can be sometimes very, very confusing. So now we're going to go ahead and layer that level of understanding on here. But this training has all been about corporations in general, the benefits of them, why they are different from sole props. We hope you got an insane amount of value from this, and we cannot wait to go ahead and continue layering on your understanding of the learning for this. We will catch you in the next training section. All right, team, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this training section in which we are going to break down the LLC. Okay, now this is probably the biggest, most confusing topic in the entire US legal system, which is understanding what the heck this LLC thing is. And as you're going to see, it's a little bit like a chameleon, and that's probably the reason why it's so confusing. But I promise you that if you even understand 10% of what it is that we are about to talk about, you are going to be golden, okay? Because we're going to talk about this topic that's called the LLC tax election. And it's this like tax election situation is what we're going to call it, okay? And all of the confusion that comes along with that, okay? So I am warning you ahead of time that this training is going to be the peak of this when we say the layers of learning and we talk about, hey, you're a beginner, you're going through kind of this first layer, right? But even in this first layer, there's like multiple layers here, right? After this training, we're then going to go ahead and pass into layer 2, which is going to be action, right? So up until now, we've been talking about like, hey, the two types of legal entities and sole prop and corporation. And now this right here is going to be the last piece that you got to understand. Okay, we're going to get a little bit technical here, but I promise we're going to do our best to make it as simple as possible. But for you as a new business owner, or maybe even as a current business owner, this is absolutely critical for you to understand. And I've said this many times before, we wish that there was a training like this that would have saved us literally years and probably tens of thousands of dollars in taxes in order to understand these topics, right? How much money we pay to legal and tax professionals to explain this stuff to us. And even then, they still didn't explain it properly, or they didn't explain it simply to us. And then we bought courses, and then we talked to the gurus, and the gurus themselves didn't know what the heck they were talking about. And so I promise you, it is going to get easier, and it will seem overwhelming at first, but you've been warned that it will get easier, but it will be overwhelming initially. Okay, so now that we've gotten these kind of warning out of the way, let's go ahead and actually jump into the topic of what the heck is an LLC. Okay, so out of all the different types of legal entities, an LLC is actually one of the newest. It's only been around in the United States for about 30 years and really only popularized and maybe popularly used in the last 20 years. So initially there was only a C Corp, okay? And then they started developing something called an S Corp, okay? And again, we're not going to talk about it in this training, but there's different reasons for a C Corp and there's different reasons for an S Corp. And then the most recent, newest type of legal entity, the newest type of corporation was an LLC, okay? So an LLC was created to be a flexible entity that would allow for even more tax saving options than a C Corp, and would be easier to set up than an S Corp. Okay, so an LLC was designed to kind of be something that is flexible, so that way it kind of does the best of all worlds. Okay, and so today the LLC is by far the most popular choice for new businesses, for holding companies, for real estate companies, and literally almost all other types of business ventures. An LLC is by far becoming the most popular. Okay, and because of an LLC being so flexible, and we'll talk about what that means, flexible, right? Because even when you research online, they're like, hey, an LLC is a flexible entity. What the heck does any of that mean? We're going to talk about that, okay? And so because it's so flexible, it has some kind of special superpowers that allow it to kind of transform, but it's because of those superpowers that is also kind of confusing, because if it was just one thing, it would be easy to understand. But because it's not just one thing, and because of the fact that it has these kind of shape-shifting superpowers, its superpowers is also what makes it confusing. And so really, at the end of the day, what makes it confusing is this thing called the LLC tax election, okay? And we call it the tax election confusion, okay? So let's break this down very simply, so that way for the rest of your career as a business owner, you will not be confused and you'll understand exactly what all of this is, okay? So the superpower that makes the LLC so flexible is also the reason, like we said, why so many people, beginners or not, are so confused by how it works. Because although the LLC works just like any other corporation for the purposes of legal protection, right? So we talked about this in the previous training. If this seems foreign to you, make sure that you did not skip the previous training, because in the previous training, we talked about the benefits of corporations. And one of the biggest benefits we talked about why corporations are so powerful is because of that protection, that separation of liability that it has between the owners, right, and their personal assets and debts, and the business, right? So when it comes to liability, okay, be very clear on this. When it comes to liability, the LLC has the benefits of a corporation, right? Now, when it comes to taxes, this is where a lot of the flexibility comes in how it is taxed. Why? Because here's the crazy thing about this. An LLC can actually choose to be taxed in different ways, right? And so this literally, when you say choose means it's just a form that you fill and you send to the IRS and say, hey, I have an LLC, I want to be taxed like this, okay? And so visually, this is what it actually looks like. Now let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So I wanted to make this bigger so you can see this very, very clearly, okay? So we have, and there's no other legal entity that has this superpower, okay? So here's the thing. You have your sole prop, okay? How does a sole prop get taxed? For the purposes of an IRS, a sole prop is a sole prop. It gets taxed as a sole prop. You have your partnership, which is, again, these are the ones that are not corporations, right? We've talked about this before. You have your partnership, right? Again, taxed exactly the same way. You got your S Corp, and S Corp is taxed as an S Corp. A C Corp, taxed as a C Corp. What about this LLC? Well, this is where this LLC can literally choose to get taxed either as what we call a standard LLC. This is our own verbiage we kind of use to simplify this. Or it can be taxed as a S Corp, or it could be taxed as a C Corp. Now, just so you know, a standard LLC gets taxed exactly the same way that a partnership or a sole prop would get taxed, okay? And so basically what this means is that a LLC can, yes, even though it is a corporation for the purposes of liability, it does have that separation, but for the purposes of taxes, right? So if you cross this out and say for the purposes of taxes, it can either be a corporation or a sole prop. Okay. And literally all it is a form that you send to the IRS, and they literally call it a tax election. Okay. So that form that you send is called a tax election form. And so when you first set up an LLC, it's just a standard LLC. It doesn't have any tax election. It gets taxed as a sole prop. And we'll explain this a little bit more in just a second, right? But then when you fill out that form, which is the tax election form, you can then say, hey, I want my LLC to get taxed now as a S Corp. I want to get my LLC taxed as a C Corp. And that is where the flexibility comes in, okay? And so right here, let me go ahead and explain this a little bit more so you can understand this. When an LLC is first created, when it's first started, okay, it starts off as just a standard basic LLC, and it is taxed as a sole prop or a partnership depending on how many people are in that LLC, okay? So if you have your LLC in here, okay, so imagine you have your LLC, and then based off of who is on the paperwork, okay, if there's 2 members or 1 member, if it is a single member LLC, it is taxed as a sole prop. If it is a double member LLC, right, or multiple member LLC, it is taxed as a partnership. But again, both of those only have one tax return, okay? So that's that one part. But then you can choose by filing that form to have it taxed as either a S Corp or a C Corp, and each of those has a different tax structure based off of the form that you filed to the IRS. And so again, this is what is called a tax election, meaning choosing how it is to be taxed. This is why the LLC is so confusing for so many people, because although legally an LLC is just a corporation, because of this whole tax election thingamajig, right? that is where it kind of gets confusing, which is a superpower, but at the same time, a little bit of a confusion because you're like, okay, well, I got to decide now how I want my LLC to be taxed, right? So it's kind of like a chameleon. You can convert your LLC to act like a sole prop, or you can have it convert to being like an S Corp or a C Corp for the purposes of taxes, right? So pretty cool, right? But also kind of confusing, right? Yes, I understand. And so yes, you are correct. This is exactly the reason why the LLC is so confusing for so many people, okay? And this is kind of the diagram that I think is going to be very helpful for you to understand, okay? So you got to understand that there's kind of two sides to this entire equation, okay? There is the liability side, and then there is the taxes side, okay? And so when it comes to liability, an LLC is an LLC. There's no different types of LLCs when it comes to liability, okay? It's just an LLC is an LLC. Any type of LLC is going to protect you from liability, just like any other corporation would, okay? But then on the taxes side of the equation, I'll show you another diagram showing the exact same thing, but just in a different way. On the taxes side, you can have either a standard LLC with no tax election, which is filed very similar to a sole prop or a partnership in which there's only one tax return that is filed, or you can have an LLC with an S Corp election, or you can have an LLC with a C Corp election, and that is taxed similar to an S Corp or a C Corp, okay? So let me make this diagram a little bit bigger so you can see this right here. This is what I want you to see right here, right? Because these diagrams here at the bottom are very important, right? So again, we have our two sides of the equation, liability, and then we got taxes right here, okay? And so you'll see when you have a standard LLC with no tax election, right? Which is just when you first start an LLC, okay? You have one tax return that is filed and there is no tax separation, meaning there is no savings on self-employment tax. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Don't get confused by that, okay? But if you file that tax election form, you then have a personal tax return and then you have a business tax return, which again has an additional cost, right? And so now not only is there the cost of the actual corporation, because in order to start a corporation is like $300, $800 a year, okay? But then you got to pay an additional amount in order to have a business tax return filed as well, okay? So again, this is just adding another level of your understanding, another tool in the toolbox for you to understand, hey, we got our hammers, we got our screwdrivers, we got our Phillips head screwdriver, our flathead, all these different types of tools. And so now we're understanding, okay, wait a second. We're building our layers of understanding, our levels and depth of how this game is played, which again, on the surface, when you first hear about it, can sound confusing, but these diagrams hopefully make it a lot easier, is that you just got to ask yourself, hey, am I talking about liability or am I talking about taxes? When it comes to liability, an LLC is just like any other corporation. It will protect me from liability. It's going to have that separation. When it comes to taxes, it depends. Does my LLC have a tax election form filed with the IRS or does it not? If it doesn't, I'm going to have one tax return that is filed, and that is going to be not saving me any taxes. It's going to be filed just like a sole prop. And if I do have a tax election form filed, I'm going to have two tax returns, and I'm going to be able to benefit from the advantages of self-employment tax, right? So let me show you the same exact thing, but with a different diagram right over here, okay? So this is just the same exact thing. You got your liability side and you got your taxes side, right? So we make these different diagrams so that way you can understand the same topic kind of with different visuals, okay? So you got your sole prop and you got your partnership, okay? For the liability side, that's what they are, okay? And then you got your taxes here, okay? Now, same thing, but an LLC, again, for the purposes of liability is on the corporation side. But for the purposes of taxes, it could either be on the one tax return file side, or it could be on the two tax return file side here, in which there are different pros and cons here on the tax return. Okay, so bottom line, what is the summary of all of this? What is it that you got to know so we can move on to the next section and blow your brain a little more, okay? Essentially, you just got to know that when it comes to taxes, with an LLC, there are two types. It's either going to be a standard LLC, in which there is no tax election. Okay, let me just go ahead and clear that so you can see a little bit clearer. Either going to be a standard LLC, which is like, hey, I first opened my LLC, I did not do a tax election. That is going to be the first type. The second type is going to be, hey, I filed a tax election with the IRS for my LLC to be taxed like a C Corp or an S Corp. Okay, now normally it's going to be an S Corp filing. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I'm not going to go into that right now, but usually a C Corp filing is going to be for bigger corporations with stocks and board of directors and stuff like that. Normally for small businesses like us, we're going to be filing a S Corp tax election for the LLC. Okay, so as long as you remember this right now, for the purposes of taxes, okay, again, for the purposes of taxes, there are two types of LLCs, standard and tax election LLCs. When it comes to liability, only one type it doesn't matter. It's just an LLC. It's just a normal corporation. Protects you from liability. Capiche? Does that make sense? I hope that is making sense right now. Okay. Now just review this if you need to. Again, repetition is going to be the thing that you have to understand this. And what we're going to do now, after that understanding, is we're now going to go ahead and take your understanding another notch up. Whew. Take a deep breath with me, okay? Stick with me here, okay? I know it's going to get a little bit more complex. I told you we're going to be working. We're going to literally break free out of this beginner layer one. We're going to get into the action. This is the peak of it. Trust me, we're going to make it through. Right now, you're going to feel like you're going through the valley of despair. You're becoming conscious of your incompetence. You're like, oh man, there's a lot more to this than I thought. Trust me, stick with me. We're breaking it down as simple as possible. Let's go ahead and double click into this LLC taxes situation together. Okay, so LLC and taxes. So do you remember in the previous training when we talked about corporations, we said that the two big reasons why people start corporations, right? If you skip that training, come on, what are you doing? Go watch that training. Very important. The two big reasons people like to start corporations is because of liability and tax savings, right? Beautiful. Hey, coach, we don't have to go over the liability part. I got it. Okay. We got this entire liability part right here. It makes sense. There's corporations, there's non-corporations. Non-corporations, you don't get separation from liability. Corporations, you get separation from liability. Got it. No issues there, right? But now when it comes to taxes, like we talked about, this is where it is confusing because the sole prop, like we said in the previous training, is at a disadvantage, right? Do you remember we talked about this whole Social Security, Medicare tax thingamajig, right? We talked about this and we said, yo, the sole prop, no bueno when it comes to start making substantial money, right? So when you start making $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 a year, you being a sole prop is messing you up because of the fact that you're having to pay double taxes. But that is where when you become a S Corp or any other type of corporation, you actually save on self-employment tax. Now, here's the thing. We said any other type of corporation. That is not actually a true statement. Why? Because when it comes to LLCs, it depends. Depends on what your tax selection filing is, okay? Remember we said there's two types. If you have a standard LLC, there is no savings when it comes to Social Security and Medicare tax because you are being taxed the same way as a sole prop, okay? So let me go ahead and walk you through this right now very clearly so you can understand. Remember all of the cons that we talked about when you have $75,000 in income and then you have a sole prop and then you have to pay both sides of the taxes. So that way it equals 15.3% and you have to pay $11,000 in taxes. Well, all of that we said in the previous training as a con to the sole prop also applies to the standard LLC in which there is no tax election. This is very important to understand. I hope I am not losing you right now, okay? Please just stick with me. We're taking it step by step, okay? The sole prop and the standard LLC in which there's no tax election have the same issue. Why? Because when you are a sole prop or when you are a standard LLC, you are both the employee and the employer. And so therefore, what you are doing, right? So this category right here in which there's only one tax return being filed, okay? When there's one tax return being filed, a sole prop or a partnership, if that's the case, or a standard LLC with no tax election, you are on the bad end of the stick once you start making a substantial amount of money because you're having to pay both Social Security and Medicare tax. And when you have to pay both because of the fact that you're a sole prop or a standard LLC with no tax election, they call that self-employment tax. We talked about this in the previous training already, okay? And so, yes, for the purposes of liability, right, this side of the equation here, yeah, sure, an LLC is different than a sole prop, right? Because a sole prop isn't a corporation. Sole prop screws you over because you don't get that separation in liability, right? So for the purpose of liability, yes, an LLC is different. But for the purposes of taxes, a standard LLC is no different from a sole prop. Okay, this is very important to understand. This means that a standard LLC in which you do not have a tax election, in which you did not file that form with the IRS, does not save you on self-employment tax. Okay, yes, you still get the business deductions on everything, right? We talked about that already. Business deductions, everybody gets the business deductions, right? If you got that Oprah meme, you get business deductions, you get business deductions, you get business deductions, sole prop gets business deductions, LLC gets business deductions, everybody gets business deductions. But when we talk about self-employment tax specifically, okay, a standard LLC does not save you on self-employment tax. I'm going to say that again. A standard LLC in which it does not have a tax election form filed with the IRS does not save anything when it comes to taxes because it is treated by the government as one tax return, okay? And it is treated exactly the same way as sole proprietorship in which you are having to pay both sides of the taxes. Are you following along with me thus far? I hope so. Okay. So then the question after that would be, how do you actually save taxes with a corporation? This is where that whole tax selection form comes in. Okay. Now, again, don't get confused by it. It's literally just a form that is filed with the IRS. Okay. It's just called a tax selection. That's all it is. Okay. But this is what happens is that you are then with that form able to take your standard LLC that has no tax selection on it, right? It's kind of like, hey, do you have this attached to your LLC or not? If you have it and you file that form, you then go and boom, you then jump into becoming an LLC with, let's say, for example, you filled out the S Corp tax selection form, but there's also a C Corp tax selection form. But like I said earlier, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to have an S Corp tax selection form because it's for small business owners and there's additional tax savings that you get as a small business owner because most of us are not running a C Corp. There's no reason for us to be running a C Corp, at least for the tax law that is right now, okay? For a long time, this has been the case, okay? And so with that tax selection form, that is how you go from being just a standard LLC and you jump now into becoming an LLC with a tax selection. So another visual over here, with that tax selection form, that is how you go from here to here, okay? Whether that be S Corp or C Corp. And like I said, you're typically going to be more on the S Corp side, okay? So first you open an LLC. Then when you are ready, you file that form with the IRS and you tell the IRS, hey, I want to put myself as a tax selection on my LLC. And that is basically saying, yo, I have this LLC. From now on, tax me as fill in the blank, S Corp or C Corp. Now, why is this helpful? The reason why it is helpful to be able to go ahead and change this chameleon type of behavior, because when you first start out with your LLC, if you decide to go with the LLC, we'll talk about some of the options in an upcoming training section. But when you first start out, you might not know how much money you are going to make in a year. And that is completely normal, right? Because of the fact that you are starting something new. So you might not want to start off as an S Corp or a C Corp off the bat. Why? Because an S Corp or a C Corp, there's going to be additional fees that come along with them. And then on top of that, if you don't make enough money, do you really want to have to file a whole separate business tax return? So then you got to pay an accountant to do your personal taxes, and then you got to pay an accountant to do your business taxes as well. But if you're like, you know what, I didn't make that much money, then you're like, you know what, because I was doing this on the side, I was still learning, all this kind of stuff. You're like, you know what, I had my LLCs, my standard LLC, and I never did this whole tax selection thing. So I only have one tax return, okay? And so here's the thing. Because you don't know how much money you're going to make, and you don't want to start off with the S Corp or C Corp because you're still dabbling and you're still trying to figure things out, you might decide, you know what, I'm going to start off my first year in business. And I'm not saying that this is what you should do. We'll talk about the scenarios about what we would do, but I'm just giving you some scenarios so you can kind of think through this, okay? You might decide, you know what, I'm going to start off my first year in business with just a standard LLC and see how things go, okay? And then right here, so think about this. Imagine this is January 1st. Obviously, it's never this clean, but I'm going to go ahead and give you an example here because this is a fiscal year. Fiscal means the financial year, the tax year, right? So typically it's going to go from January to December, okay? And so what's going to happen is you start in, let's say, theoretically, in January, February, March, whatever month you start in, okay? And you say, cool, I'm going to be a standard LLC. No tax selection, so that means I'm going to get taxed as a sole prop, okay? And then as the year goes on, you're like, man, things are going a lot better than I thought, right? I got access to this business basics course. I got access to this launch course. I actually learned how business is done. I learned about marketing. I learned about sales. I didn't think I was going to make that much money, but then it ended up going really well. And I went ahead and actually made a good amount of money. Now, usually what we say a good amount of money is going to be 75,000 to 100,000, right? So typically past 50 to 75,000 is when you actually want to take this into consideration. If you make less than that, typically it doesn't work out where it makes sense for you to get that tax selection. But if you start making more than 50 or 70,000, it does. And so then you might decide, you know what? It's worth for me, because I want to save on taxes, for me to now become an S Corp. But here's the problem with that, right? If you were stuck with that LLC, and let's say an LLC could not be changed, right? So let's say, for example, you could not change the LLC was the LLC. You would have to shut down your LLC and go open an S Corp. And you would lose all of you'd have to open another bank account, you'd have to get another registration. And on top of that, you'd lose all of that revenue, all of those deductions that you got inside of that corporation, inside of the LLC. But then here's the thing. Instead of going out and just opening an S Corp and lose all of that, progress that you had with your LLC, tax deductions, revenue, etc., you can now just convert your LLC by getting an S tax selection, and that's going to then further save you on taxes. Because here's the thing. As you were going through the year, you didn't know how it was going to go. you didn't know if you were going to even have that much taxes to save on, right? Because if you don't, like, here's the thing. People are like, oh, I got to save on taxes. Like, dude, like 30%, because taxes are usually like 30%, depending on if you had state tax rate, if you live in California, add another 10%, 12% of that, right? So let's say 30%. 30% of $0, my friend, is still $0 in taxes, okay? And so some people are like, I got to learn how to save on taxes. And they're not even making any money yet. Like 30% of $10,000 is still not that much, right? And so that's the reason why they say typically 50, 75,000, 100,000, somewhere in that range, it now actually starts to become a significant amount of money that you would save on taxes that would offset the complexity, the additional fees, the additional tax return of actually doing the tax election, okay? So no other legal entity allows you to transform how you will be taxed literally just in the middle of the year. You could literally make up your mind as long as you're doing it before December, right? And there's some legality around this, right? So if you have a very savvy legal and tax professional, they will know what they are doing. If they know what they're doing, they will know that there are IRS rulings with special documentation that allow them to what they call retroactively do a S election, okay? So again, you got to just make sure that you got somebody who knows what they're doing, okay? And we're going to make some recommendations for you later on so you can better understand this. And so with all the other entities, once you are that entity, that's it. You're locked in. If you're an S Corp, you're an S Corp. If you're a C Corp, you're a C Corp. If you're a sole prop, you're a sole prop. You can't change it. But not with the LLC. You can choose to be taxed differently retroactively. So you can literally go back in time, right? So it's kind of like time travel over here, okay? You can literally be like, look, I was a standard LLC for most of the year, but I'm now going to do a retroactive tax election and say that all of the income that I generated as a standard LLC, I now want that to be S Corp revenue being generated. How cool is that, right? And so again, just to go over this one last time, just so it's very, very clear, why would you want to be taxed as an S Corp once you hit between $75,000 and $100,000 in annual revenue, right? Why would you want that to be the case? Because when you have an LLC that is a corporation and you tell it that, hey, Mr. IRS, Mrs. IRS, tax me as an S Corp, you get to then divide your revenue into owner's distribution and salary, employee salary, okay? So you only have to then pay self-employment tax on the employee salary part of your profits. Now, we talked about this with the S Corp example, if you remember previously, right? So we went ahead and said, hey, this is what it would look like, right? So you come over here and let's say, for example, you got your sole prop, you got your standard LLC, and you got your LLC with S Corp tax selection, okay? And let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger for you so you can see it. I personally love seeing these numbers like this because then it allows me to actually make it tangible, which is like, okay, cool. I got my sole prop, I got my standard LLC, I got my LLC with S Corp tax selection. Remember, the only difference between these two right here, okay, is that this guy right here did not file the form with the IRS. This guy did file the form with the IRS. And so let's say in all three examples, we have $100,000 in revenue, okay? They generated $100,000 in revenue. Let's say they had about $25,000 in business tax deduction write-offs, okay? So they, notebooks, computers, all of the stuff that we talked about. Okay, what they are left is their pre-tax profit earnings before tax, which is $75,000 across all three of them, okay? Now, here's where it gets interesting. If this person is a sole prop, they did not know anything about anything, right? They did not take the business basics course. They didn't understand anything. They're like, cool, I was just running my business, worried about marketing and sales. I didn't understand how this game is played. I was just a sole prop. I was just running out of my bank account. Okay, that $75,000, they're going to have to pay self-employment tax, which is 15.3%, which is going to be $11,000. Okay, so you take $75,000 times 15.3%, it's around $11,400, right? Then obviously after that, they got to take out their federal income tax, their state income tax. That's not going to change, right? And so then they have to pay $7,500 more in additional taxes, okay? Standard LLC, because it works exactly the same way as a sole prop. Let me clear this out so you can see this, okay? Because it is taxed exactly the same way as a sole prop, these two fellas right here, they are screwed for the exact same amount, okay? They do not get to save anything on the self-employment tax, okay? Right over here, they are saving nada. But then this person over here, they understand, hey, I could file a retroactive S election. I could actually understand how this game is played. On that same $75,000 in income, I can divide it on $50,000 is going to be owner's distribution. And then I'm going to make $25,000 of that employee salary income. They're only going to pay the self-employment tax on the actual employee salary part of it, which is going to be roughly about $3,500. And so they're going to save $7,500 in taxes because of the fact that they were more savvy about this. Is this making a little bit more sense? I hope so. This is, again, the peak of your understanding. This is as complex as it is going to get, We talked about sole prop. We talked about corporation. I talked about S corps a little bit in previously, but now you're understanding, hey, with the LLC, I can have that S corp tax election. Okay. So with the LLC, you can get the best of all worlds as long as you understand how it works and how to actually use it. And that is why the LLC is such a great corporate structure, so long as, again, so long as you understand how it actually works. Okay, now I'm going to remind you one last time. You do not have to 100% get, memorize, or understand anything that we went ahead and talked about inside of this training section, okay? Remember, the more reps you get with this, the more you marinate in this, the more you actually take action on it, the more you actually go out and if you're going to set up an LLC, which will walk you through the setup process, if you're going to be a sole prop or a standard LLC or an LLC with the tax election, the more you go through with this process year after year after year, remember, you're going to be in business for a very long period of time. The more you go through with this, it's going to click for you more and more and more. And that's the reason why it is so important to make sure that you have these trainings as a reference guide for you so you can come back to them again and again and again and understand exactly how all of this works. Because every single time you watch these trainings, as you start to change, right? Because you're watching this training right now at your level of business right now. But as your level of business increases, you come back to these trainings and I promise you, you're going to understand them at a completely different level. And so I hope this is starting to make a little bit more sense. Okay. I hope that your level of learning is increasing. Okay. And again, don't worry. Like I said, if this is your first time hearing this, it is going to sound confusing, but with repetition, it will get easier. Now, before we close out this training, I do want to go ahead and answer one more question that will come up a lot of times for beginner business owners. It's like, hey, why does anyone even have a standard LLC, right? So like this puppy right over here, this standard LLC, no tax election, what's the point of it? Like, why doesn't everybody just off the bat open an LLC and immediately file that tax selection form with the IRS and then start to actually get into this category over here, right? Like, why not do that? And why not actually separate from the get-go, right? Because we talked about the cons of having to pay that self-employment tax. Why not off the bat just separate between your owner's distributions and your employee salary income so you can start saving on taxes, right? The reason is because there is additional fees and complexity, is because when you go into this category right over here, right? And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm gonna mention it again, is that you now have to pay yourself payroll, which is an additional cost every single month that you got to figure out how to do, okay? Because in order to be able to get this separation, right? So this separation here between owner's distribution and payroll, that means that you now have to actually treat yourself kind of like an employee of your company, which is kind of confusing, but that's the whole point of this separation, right? This separation allows you to kind of become the employee of the company rather than being the company, okay? That is the first additional cost that happens once you actually get into this category right over here, okay? The second additional cost, and I alluded to this before, is that now there's another tax return. It's called a business tax return that has to be filed, okay, because you got that tax election. And so now there's that additional cost that you then have to do, which is even more expenses. And so because there are all of these fees, when you decide to convert your standard LLC, this puppy right over here, when you decide to convert this standard LLC into a, tax election LLC, because of that, it depends on how much are your tax savings really going to be, right? Because there's going to be additional cost and complexity here. And so you got to actually weigh, hey, does the additional cost and complexity actually offset any tax advantages that I would have? And so if you are below, and this is just a general recommendation, right? If you are below $50,000 to $100,000 in yearly earnings, the extra fees are typically not worth the extra tax savings. So it's better for you to just stay as a standard LLC without any tax election. But again, remember, you still get the liability protection because you're an LLC, but you just don't get any tax benefit because you're a standard LLC. And so typically if you're below that mark, that is going to be like where most accountants and most people would say, hey, you know what? It might be better for you to stay a standard LLC. And then as your business earnings get above $50,000 to $100,000, then you know what? You're going to save enough on taxes that it's worth for you to be able to mess with all of the complexity that comes from this category over here. Does that make sense? I hope so. Again, we're doing our best to make this as simple as possible. I know it is not an easy topic. I know it's not an easy subject. And this is the reason why the entire industry literally feeds off of the confusion of people, because unfortunately, most people do not have the opportunity to have access to training like this that simplifies this for them and actually walks them through this entire process step by step. And hey, guess what? We're not even done yet. We're still got to get to the practical part of this entire training, in which we're going to walk you through, hey, what's your scenario? This is a recommendation of what we would do, all of that kind of stuff. We're about to get into that in the next training section as well. Okay, so this is what the table looks like in regards to where we have been thus far and putting all of the different factors together, right? So we got our sole prop, and then we got our LLC. The LLC is a corporation, so there is a cost in order to be able to actually renew that with the state, $300 to $800 per year, okay? And then over here, it kind of divides up. You either have the standard LLC with no tax selection, right? Or you have the LLC with the S-Corp tax selection, right? So over here, when it comes to, let me go ahead and clear this out for you. Right here, when it comes to self-employment tax and saving self-employment tax, sole prop, wrong. There's no self-employment tax savings on there, okay? And then same thing here, standard LLC, nope. No savings for self-employment tax at 15.3%, Social Security and Medicare tax that you got to pay on both sides, but the tax selection does have those savings, okay? And then in regards to taking payroll, do you have to pay yourself payroll on a sole prop? You do not, so you can save $50 per month there. And then over here, you do not have to pay yourself payroll either, because as a standard LLC, you are literally the business, so there's no separate tax return. There's no payroll that you're paying for yourself. However, over here, because you on the business are separate now, there's two tax returns. You have to pay yourself payroll separately as an employee of the company, right? Tax return complexity, right over here, there's a personal tax return, which is called the 1120. You don't have to remember that. Just marinating in it. And a Schedule C form, which is filed with your personal taxes, right? And over here, pretty much the exact same thing. You're just filing the 1120 with a Schedule C form. But then over here, not only is there your personal tax return, but then there's also an S-Corp tax return. So there's two tax returns that are filed here versus there are only one and one that are filed here. And then finally, you got our overall cost over here. It's free, basically maybe $25, here and there. But then over here, you got $300 to $800 setup plus yearly renewal. And then over here, this is going to be the biggest kind of cost over here, $300 to $800 setup plus yearly renewal plus separate tax return plus having to do the payroll cost over there as well. Okay, so these are the options that we've talked about. We're going to go ahead and really break down each of these options in the next training. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to congratulate you because you have made it. Congratulations. You now have an introductory understanding of, in my opinion, the most complex, the most misunderstood, the most kind of strange topic in all of legal and accounting, which is the LLCs. Has this training opened your eyes? I hope right now you are saying, yes, coach, my eyes have been opened. I now understand, hey, there's liability side of the equation, there's the taxes side of the equation. And even with this introductory understanding, I'm telling you, compared to what most business owners or wannabe business owners have, you are an absolute pro, even with this just basic understanding that we've talked about here, okay? And honestly, I would venture out to even say that compared to most people who have even been in business for a long period of time, you have a better understanding than they do on these topics as well, okay? So you are well on your way to becoming a professional entrepreneur. So we were not joking when we said that we were going to build your understanding layer by layer by layer by layer, because of the fact that you saw we started off very, very basic, but then we started getting more and more advanced, and now we're here at the top of the mountain. I'm sure it must feel great to have a better understanding of these topics. Now, for some people right now, they're like, this does not feel great, coach. Holy moly, my brain is on fire. I'm scared. I'm overwhelmed, okay? And so let me go ahead and just calm you down for a second, okay? How many reps have you ever had learning about legal and tax structures, right? Do you just in your free time spend time looking at legal and tax structures? Probably not, right? And so obviously the same way that when you learn how to swim or when you learn how to ride a bike, or you learn how to drive, you probably were overwhelmed as well, okay? And so why do you think that you're not going to be overwhelmed the first time that you look at freaking legal and tax structures? Of course you are, right? It's a complex topic. And so it's normal to be overwhelmed, right? This material is no different from anything else that you learned for the first time, right? And yet there are millions of people out there that have been able to do this, and so can you, right? Is everyone else out there who's learned it feeling afraid, right? Does anybody else feel like this? How can I get past this feeling? These are questions that sometimes a lot of beginners have, like, hey, why am I so afraid? How can I get past this feeling? I'm here to tell you, what you may be feeling right now as you start your business is completely normal. Okay? We all feel overwhelmed, confusion, fear, doubt, uncertainty, right? There is no, how do I get over this feeling? It doesn't exist. You will not get over this feeling because you are learning something new. That is how life works. But here's the difference. Professional business owners versus those who wear the failure uniform and want to be entrepreneurs, right? They feel the same way. The only difference is that the failure uniform business owners, those who are entrepreneurs, they let those feelings stop them, while the winner business owners, they push through despite how they feel, despite the fear, despite the doubt, despite the uncertainty. They do not let those feelings stop them. Because I think a lot of people who are beginner new business owners think that, because I feel this way, something must be wrong. Those people who are successful, they must not feel this way. I'm telling you right now, that is not true. It is absolutely false. When you start to judge how you are feeling and you think that you shouldn't feel this way, well, guess what? That is when you are actually giving those emotions even more power, okay? Because if you get caught up saying, hey, I got to stop feeling this certain way, it's only going to get worse. Instead, what you got to tell yourself, hey, this overwhelm, this confusion that I'm feeling, it's normal. Everyone feels this way when they are starting something that they haven't done before. Everybody felt the same way when they started to learn how to drive or when they had to learn how to swim, right? Everybody feels the same way. Michael Phelps, the Olympian swimmer, when he first learned how to swim the first time, I'm guaranteeing you that he was not born knowing how to swim. People are not born knowing this stuff. They just put up with the feelings long enough in order to actually get good at it. Okay, so don't let that stop you, right? Say, I won't let that stop me. I'm going to push through anyway. Normal human emotions, every single person feels the same. You got to become the type of person who doesn't let those emotions stop them. This is the type of person who is a winning professional business owner. And I have no doubt that if you keep on sticking with us, right, we're going to walk you through this process. I promise you, you can get there, and we're going to be there to support you every step of the way. Okay. So here's the thing. If all of this did go over your head, don't worry. It's fine. There is no test here. Okay. It's just something that's good for you to be familiar with. And this training is going to be here for you for a very long time for you to be able to come back and reference. And then when you start making past $10,000 a month in income and you start to take your taxes more seriously, then don't worry. We're going to have even more advanced course, right? The mastery course of tax and legal mastery that's going to walk you through that furthermore. Now, as you close out this training, does this mean that you can skip all of this? No, nobody's saying that you got to have a PhD in all of this. It's just helpful for you to know all of this stuff when you go talk to a CPA, okay? So because it's not a matter of how much money you make, it's a matter of how much money you keep, and knowing how this game is actually played is going to allow you to keep more money, right? Wouldn't it be smart for you to be somewhat familiar with what the heck that tax or legal professional is going to be saying to you? So that way, not only are they not ripping you off, but I have had plenty of tax and legal professionals in which I had to remind them and ask them questions that would have literally cost me tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional taxes. Okay. So this is the reason why you do not want to skip this. And that's why you can't just leave it to the lawyers and the accountants to only deal with this. You want to be familiar with this. And again, we are doing our best, ladies and gentlemen. We are doing our best to go ahead and give you that kickstart. I know this training was a little bit longer. I apologize. I'm sorry. This training was a little bit more intense. We were dealing with probably the most complex topic in all of it, which was the LLC. But again, we're going ahead and explaining to you this in the next training section. We're going to go ahead and actually get into the practical so you can start to actually go ahead and get started with your corporation in the background. And then once that corporation in the background has been started, you can then continue and move on with your business website, your client agreements, learning about marketing and sales and all that stuff with this corporation stuff happening in the background. You are through all of the difficult parts now. We are going to go ahead and close this training off. LLCs explained, ladies and gentlemen, liability, taxes. Oof, my mind is blown. I need a break after this one. I don't know if you need a break as well. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we will catch you now getting into the tactical and the practical in the next training section. All right, welcome to this training section that is going to be a transition training section in which now I want to go ahead and congratulate you because from this training onwards, we are now going to go ahead and be talking about the tactical. We're going to be talking about, hey, in your specific scenario, inside of your specific situation, what is the route that you should go through? Should you go down the sole prop route? Should you go down the LLC route? And so what we're going to go ahead and do as we now talk about your specific situation, I want to go ahead and clarify something very important, okay? Is that we are not going to be talking about all of the different types of entities going forward. Yes, we could go ahead and do that, but as you've probably noticed, as we're going through these trainings, we're going ahead and making them tactical and practical. Our goal is not to make this into some kind of seminar, semester long course about all the theoretical kind of things that you got to know about business and everything like that. We want to make this as tactical as possible for you so you can go in and go ahead and get your business up and running, so that way you can go out and make the income impact and have the freedom that you are looking to have. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make it practical to 99% of the situations for new business owners. Okay. And so here's the image that you have come to recognize. What we are going to be doing is we are going to primarily be focusing here on the sole prop side of things. Okay. And then we're primarily also going to be focusing on the LLC side of things, which is right over here, right? There's a little bit of a rundown right there, right? And the reason for that is because we are going to touch on partnerships a little bit, but partnerships in this form is not the way that we would recommend it. We actually would recommend, when we get to the LLC section, if you are going to be setting up a partnership, doing that via an LLC, that is the better route to go. So that is the reason why partnerships would not make sense there. And then in regards to S Corps and C Corps, there's no reason for us to talk about those because the LLC is able to have that tax election that allows it to act like an S Corp or a C Corp. Okay, so for that reason, that is the reason why you are seeing these other legal entities grayed out, because henceforth, going forward from this training, right? Previously, we've all talked about all of kind of like the foundational understanding, those layers of learning that were critical for you to understand about legal and legal entities in the United States in general, right? And now we're going to start getting into that tactical. So like I said, partnerships, not applicable for most business owners, but if you're starting a business with a partner, you can go ahead and ask in the community. We can also make a further training on how to actually create a partnership using an LLC. It's a little bit more advanced. We'll touch on it just a little bit, but if you're looking for even more information about that, make sure that you ask inside of the community so that way we can get feedback around what it is that you would like to have created, right? S Corps and C Corps, we already touched on that because of the fact that an LLC can act as either of those. That's the reason why we will not be touching on those either, okay? And so again, going forward, we will be talking about the sole prop, we will be talking about the standard LLC, and we will be talking about the LLC with the S Corp tax selection. Now, if that tax selection stuff does not make any sense to you, that means you probably skipped a very, very, very important training in which we talk about LLCs and what a tax selection is. But for those of you who that does make sense to, then you are on the same page with me. So I hope that is absolutely clear. Let's go ahead, and in the very next training section, we are going to go ahead and jump now into the tactical. Hey, which one do you start with? Sole prop, LLC? What are the scenarios? Let's go ahead and talk about that, and I will catch you in the next training section. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to finally the practical. Which one do you actually start with? The tactical. I hope you are now understanding why it was so important for us to actually layer on your learning, because before we can actually get into the action step, we had to help you understand, hey, what are the legal entities that are existing? What is the purpose of a sole prop? What is the purpose of a corporation? How does an LLC work? If you didn't have those layers of understanding, it would be impossible for us to even have a conversation, because we wouldn't even be agreeing on the terms. You and I would not be able to have a conversation on, hey, when we say do an LLC, well, the question you'd ask is, why an LLC? Why not do something else? Well, now you know, right? Because you've gone through all of those foundational trainings. The other thing that's very important as we dive into the practical here is that we completely understand, and we have actually designed this course because we understand that many of those who are starting businesses out are trying to do things as efficiently, and oftentimes, because you're a startup, you're not trying to go out there and hire a bunch of lawyers and have like some sophisticated legal entity with like a holding company and then doing this and that and all the fancy stuff that you can do when you're making large sums of money in your business later on, right? So you're doing it a lot more cheaply in the beginning. So don't worry. Everyone has been in that situation when they were getting started out. We were in that situation when we were starting out. And so when we first started out, we were making sure that we were doing everything as cheap and as easy as possible, because especially in the beginning, the most important thing to be focusing on in the business is, hey, let me just get the bare bones infrastructure in place so I can then go focus on the marketing and the sales and the actual making of the money. And then you can then level your income up and then start to focus on more advanced strategy. So everything that we have broken down in the upcoming scenarios that we're going to go ahead and talk about right now is to make it so that way it is as easy as possible, so that way there is no excuse for anyone to say, hey, you know what, I got stuck or I couldn't get set up or anything like that, okay? So what we're going to go ahead and do right now is I want to go ahead and make sure that we're clear on the training disclaimer as well. We are holding companies, any of our DBAs, we are not providing with all these scenarios tax, legal, or accounting advice, okay? We're just going to be giving you the scenarios of what we would do in that situation, but we are not tax, legal, or accounting professionals, okay? And so all we're doing is that we're educating you so that way when you do go out there and talk to the tax and legal professionals, you actually know what it is that you are talking about and you can ask the right questions so that way you are empowered and you are your own advocate, okay? And so let's talk about what the actual process might look like as you are thinking through this situation. Because here's the truth, and this is why it's a little bit difficult for beginners and new business owners, is that everyone's situation is going to be different as they come into this, okay? And so what our job here is to provide just general information on the different paths that exist. And so this is what an example of kind of thinking through the process might actually look like, right? So I might start off in thinking with my first thought, you know what? Maybe nothing is needed from me right now, right? So right now, I might not want to deal with any of this really. You know, I'm just learning, I'm just testing, I'm just practicing maybe for the first 6 months of my business. I don't really plan on getting any paid clients right now, right? So you know what? I'm just going to work with some practice clients. So in this case, you know what? Let me think about this. I might actually be good. There might not actually be nothing for me to do, right? Because I can go out there and have fun. I don't got to have an LLC. I don't got to have a business bank account because of the fact that, you know what? I'm just kind of testing around and dabbling. And even if I do get clients, it's going to be practice clients for me to just go ahead and practice my skills with. Some of you may fall into that circumstance or in that situation, right? Well, hey, here's a second thought, right? This is the kind of the option of a sole prop, but a business bank account. But on second thought, you know what? I might actually want to bring in some paid clients over the next couple months, right? And if that's the case, then maybe because I'm already a sole prop by default, right? Because the government already makes us a sole prop as soon as you make your first dollar, because we talked about that before. And because there's no fees or paperwork needed, then you know what? I can just start accepting money right away and I can start getting tax write-offs. And then when it comes tax time, I'll just have to fill out an extra form, which is called a Schedule C, to let the government know that, hey, you know what? I brought in this much revenue and this is how many expenses that I had, and that's it. And then for the business bank account, right? The thing is that with the business bank account, if I even bring in just one paid client, things are going to start to get messy with my personal bank account, right? Because then I can't actually keep my business revenue and my personal money separate, right? And so because of that, and because I'm just a sole prop and I'm just kind of maybe have one paid client here and there, I might want to go ahead and actually open up a business bank account, which is perfectly okay because as a sole prop, I can actually open up a business bank account, which I'm completely allowed to do. And right now, remember, we're just thinking out loud here. I might not actually need an LLC right now because you know what? I'm only dabbling. I only have a few clients, right? My liability is very low because I only have like 2-3 clients. It's not like I'm going to get sued, right? And I don't think I'm going to be able to get to that $25,000 in the next year. So because of that, you know what? For me, if this was my circumstance and if this was how I was thinking through it, then a sole prop, but having a business bank account might actually be better for me. Are you starting to see, let me kind of break frame here so you can kind of understand. Are you starting to see some of the different factors that somebody would consider based off of their individual situation? And that's one of the most difficult things for us when we make trainings is we don't know, right? Because this is not me talking to you live right now to ask you a bunch of questions to know your situation. And so what we have to do is we have to design these trainings in a way that's going to be applicable to the most number of people. And this specific topic is probably the reason why a lot of educators, course creators, they find it difficult to be able to talk to people about, but we found a way, because we're giving you these kind of prompts or these scenarios, to be able to go ahead and make it applicable so that way you are empowered to make the decision that is going to be best for you. So this might be my second thought, right? Let's talk about the third thought that might be applicable to some people, right? Which is, let's say, liability protection, right? So, you might start thinking, but what if I start to actually get more than just a few clients? What if I end up getting sued, right? Well, here's the thing. If I'm a sole prop, and like we talked about in the previous foundational training, all the liability is on me because I am the business, right? So you know what? On second thought, you know what? I might want to have some more protection. So even though it is going to cost me $300 to $800 every year for that filing cost on the LLC, you know what? It might actually be worth it for me to go ahead and just get a standard LLC. I'm not going to do a tax selection, right? So even though I know it won't save me on taxes right now because, you know, I'm only going to be making, let's say $25,000 a year with these extra clients, right? But just the liability protection, maybe for me, I'm just thinking out loud here, might be enough for me to justify that $300 or $800 yearly expense cost for me. That might be something that for some of you, that might be the situation and the thought process that you're in, right? Maybe the fourth thought over here. Okay, let me clear this out so you can see. The fourth thought, hey, you know what? Other than me being worried about being sued, I like knowing that if I am a standard LLC, and that if things go really well all of a sudden in the year and I start really kind of getting to the point where I'm making $5,000 to $10,000 per month, that, you know what, I can then backdate and retroactively convert my standard LLC with a LLC S tax election and save thousands in taxes. I like knowing that if I start off with that standard LLC, yes, you know what, it's going to cost me that $300 to $800 every single year, but I like knowing that if things go very well, then I can go ahead and save thousands of dollars in taxes if I get to that $50,000, $75,000 a year mark, right? Which is about $5,000 to $10,000 a month. And so even though I know that saving thousands in taxes will only happen once I'm really making enough income in my business, again, $5,000 to $10,000 per month, to offset that additional expenses and complexity of an LLC with S Corp tax election, I'm willing to be able to pay the $300 to $800 per year to keep my LLC open, because based on my goals for myself and how much revenue I know that I will bring in over the next year, for me, it might actually be worth it, okay? And so I hope you're seeing by all of these different examples and all of these different thought processes, this is what the different thoughts and kind of variables that you need to be thinking about as you're going to be making this decision, okay? So what we've gone ahead and done is we've gone ahead and simplified all of this thinking that I'm showing you here on the screen right now, and we've simplified that into 3 options, okay? And that's exactly what I'm going to be walking you through right now, is exactly what those 3 potential options could look like. Now, based off of our vantage point, we couldn't think of what option 4 or 5 might be. If you do end up coming up with like, hey, you know what? My situation might be different. Hey, you know what? I'm not sure if what I should do in this specific circumstance. Then obviously that's the reason why we built this program as a community-based program, because of the fact that there are going to be other people in this program, new business owners, people who are on the same journey as you, who might have the answer to this. So that's the reason why you can go ahead and ask inside of the community. But for the purposes of where you are right now, and most likely your current level of income, but again, remember, we don't know. Somebody might come into this program like, hey, you know what? I already have clients. I'm already making $10,000 a month, XYZ, right? Which one of these options is going to be good for you. But if you're like, hey, I'm coming to this program, I'm already making $30,000 a month, then hey, maybe there is an option 4. But for most people, the 3 options are going to be, number 1, you can start off as a sole prop with no business bank account. Okay, that's what biz bank means, no business bank account, and then evaluate. Option number 2, you can start as a sole prop with a business bank account and then evaluate. Or option number 3 is you can start an LLC, okay, and then you can go ahead and file for an S tax election once you're at around $5,000 to $10,000 a month consistently. Okay, so here's a visual representation of that. Option 1, option 2, and then option 3 is kind of like a transition here, right? So you start off as a normal LLC, no tax election, and then once you're at around $5,000 to $10,000 a month in monthly revenue, or $50,000 to $100,000 a year in annual revenue, you would then go ahead and get that LLC S Corp tax election, okay? So here's what it looks like on a table format, and let me go ahead and explain this a little bit more so that way all of us are on the same page with this, okay? So option number 1, again, start sole prop, no business bank account, then evaluate. Where would this option apply? If you are for sure that there is no money in the picture, right? Meaning that you are not going to be collecting any money from clients. All you're doing right now is just testing, practicing, exploring, right? You're just looking to test with practice clients, not looking to get any paid clients for right now, right? If you are in that test and practice and learning mode for the next 6 to 12 months, then option 1 is going to be the option for you. Now, why not do this option? The reason why some people may not want to do this option is because as soon as any incoming money comes into the picture, this option becomes extremely messy. Because when you start collecting money, where is that money going to go, right? It's going to go into your personal bank account. And then you don't have separation between your personal and your business revenue. That is where this option becomes extremely messy. And so that is why this option is only good if there is no money in the picture. Okay, I hope that's clear. Let's now talk about option number 2. Option number 2 is where you start a sole prop with a business bank account and then evaluate. When is this good? It's as soon as money's in the picture, but you know what? You're like, you know what? I'm going to get a couple paying clients. Maybe let's say 1 to 3 paying clients. I'm just dabbling towards getting 1 to 3 paying clients for the next 12 months only, right? Now, when would this not be an option? Here's the thing. As soon as you start getting more than 1 to 3 paying clients and you plan on now getting, let's say, 10 or 20 paying clients, what happens is you now risk the audit, right? So the risk of audit goes up because once you start making past $20,000 to $50,000 a year, then even the IRS is a little bit suspicious of somebody making that much money as a sole prop, right? And if you're kind of scaling to, let's say, past $50,000 a year, you might as well just get an LLC because then you can save on taxes because it's going to be coming down the road. Plus, if you see yourself getting to $50,000 a year, you might as well just go with option 3 because if you're going to start a business bank account here with this option, if you start an LLC, you're going to have to make a new bank account, which can be annoying to switch, right? And so that might be a reason why you might not want to do this option. But for those of you who are like, you know what, I'm just going to be doing this on the side. I'm really not going to exceed $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 a year for sure. I'm just kind of dabbling here on the side, but I like being able to have the option to collect money. Then having the business bank account with the sole prop would be a good option. Now, option 3, and this is, again, I don't know if this is going to be the majority of people, but I can see this being a very, very realistic option for a lot of people, which is, hey, start an LLC, okay? And you say, you know what? I want the liability and protection from the very beginning, right? That would be somebody who's like, yeah, that's what I want to do with option number 3. And they're okay with spending $300 to $800 a year in order to get the LLC paperwork filed with the state, okay? And they like knowing that if they get past $5,000 to $10,000 per year consistently within the next year, then they can go ahead and save money on that self-employment tax with that retroactive S-Corp tax election. Okay, now, why might not this be a good option for some people? Okay, because there is more paperwork and it does have costs associated with this option compared to the sole prop, right? For the sole prop, I mean, you're just opening a bank account. It's pretty much free to get started. There's nothing there, right? There is a cost involved there. And so if you only plan on dabbling with, let's say, 1 to 3 clients max, you know what? Liability really isn't going to be that big of a kind of concern, right? Because unless you're a terrible human being and you just just totally mess with your clients in terrible ways, if you just have that low level of kind of clients, you're not going to have that much liability. And it might not actually be worth it for you to have all these extra costs if you don't have that many more clients, right? But if you're like, you know what? I'm probably going to have maybe more than 20,000 and I'm going to start off with the LLC. My only cost is going to be $300 to $800 a year. And then once I get past $50,000 a month, I can then go ahead and actually get that S-Corp tax election, which again come with some additional costs because you have a second tax return. But again, that is option number 3. So again, just to make it very, very clear, because I know sometimes it can be confusing with all that LLC talk that we have done, okay? The only reasons that you would really open an LLC and pay $300 to $800 a year is either for liability protection, because it is a corporation. We've talked about this in a previous training, okay? And or to save on self-employment tax, which is only applicable once you hit $5,000 to $10,000 a month consistently, and then actually upgrade to that S-Corp tax election. So these are the 3 options that we've talked about. Now, even with this, I can see that there's going to be a lot of new business owners who might still struggle with, hey, I'm not 100% sure which option I should go with. So let's go ahead and now give you some scenarios of what we would do based off of the different circumstances. Okay, so scenario numero 1, scenario number 1 is testing and practicing, okay? If you are just testing and practicing, then what you do is you start off with a sole prop, which is no business bank account, and just learn, okay? That's option number 1 that we talked about, is if I knew that I was just going to have test and practice clients, no paid clients, for the next 3 to 6 months, and I'm just dabbling, and then on the side, I'm just exploring, right? I would then go ahead and start a sole prop with no business bank account. And then after 3 or 6 months, I would evaluate and see, hey, where am I? How did I do in terms of, how much progress I thought I was going to make? And then I can either move to option number 2, if I think, I might still only be dabbling, but just dabbling with some paid clients. Or I might decide, enough of this dabbling, enough of only having practice clients, I'm now going to go ahead and move on to the LLC, okay? So that would be what you do after 3 to 6 months, but that is scenario number 1. Then from there, scenario number 2 is if you have no previous business experience, you have limited funds, and you're doing this on the side. In this case, you might start off as a sole prop with a business bank account for your first, let's say in our case, we would say, we do it for our first 1 to 3 paid customers, because personally, the chances of me, the way that I know how I deal with clients, of me getting sued when I only have 3 customers is not very high unless I'm a terrible human being, right? And so the chances for me personally, I would be okay with those and saying, I don't need an LLC for that liability protection. And so with the sole prop with business bank account on my 1 to first 3 clients, I would then be able to get my tax write-offs. I could use my social security number to go ahead and open up a business bank account. So that way I don't have to worry about, having to get an EIN or something like that. And so this option would be cheap, simple, easy, and I can do everything an LLC can do, but I don't actually have to file an LLC, right? And then I've proven to myself that I can do this, and I'm just starting to get the idea of how all of this works. This would be scenario 2. And then after I have my 1 to 3 paid clients, I would then go ahead and get an LLC, right? So once I'm getting some more traction, I'm getting some more momentum, then I would go ahead and say, you know what? It's worth for me to pay that $300 to $800 to get my LLC created and then also get an EIN number for that. But here's the thing. Once I get that EIN number, I'd have to go to the bank and open another bank account and redo my entire setup because I have to now get that business bank account with the EIN number, right? So it's different than me getting in a business bank account with my social security number, right? So yes, there is more work to do because I have to redo my entire system with my bank account. But you know what? In scenario 2, I wasn't sure how long it was really going to even take me to get my first 1 to 3 paying customers. And so because of that, I'm willing to put in that additional work because in this case, you know what? I had limited funds anyways. I was doing this on the side. I wanted to see what the traction was going to look like. Okay. So that is where scenario 2 would apply in terms of this different conditions of what I would think about if I was doing option number 2 with scenario 2. Okay. Now scenarios 3, 4, and 5. Let's go ahead and talk about that. If I was in the situation in which I had previous business experience and I had more funds, okay, that's scenario 3. Or if I was in scenario 4 in which I was worried about liability and I already had the funds, okay? Or scenario number 5 in which I was certain that I could get 1 to 3 paying clients in the next 3 to 6 months and 10 plus clients in the next 12 months, not test or practice clients, okay? And honestly, there's that kind of a scenario 6 there as well, which is maybe I'm coming into this and maybe you are in this situation where you're in business basics, you've actually had clients before and you have already been going through this, but you didn't know any of this existed. If that is scenario 6, then this is what would apply for me as well, okay? What I would do, I would start off with an LLC off the bat, so that way I wouldn't have to worry about opening up another business bank account later on. I just have it from the beginning. And then I would file for an S Corp tax selection. That's a form, right? Once I get my LLC past around $5,000 to $10,000 a month in income, which I'm starting to get to about, let's say $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year in annual revenue, right? So once I get to $50,000 to $100,000 in yearly revenue, I would then run the numbers myself and with a tax professional to see if it would be worth it for me to go ahead and do that S Corp tax selection. Because remember, when you do that S Corp tax selection, you now got to file another tax return because now you have separated yourself from the entity versus when you're a standard LLC, right? In which you haven't filed that form yet, it's just one tax return. That's it, right? And so I would run the numbers to see, you know what, based off of how much yearly revenue I have done, based off of my expenses, all that kind of stuff, is it worth for me with the payroll expenses and the additional fees for the additional tax return for me to go ahead and do that? However, I would still start off with that LLC. If these were the scenarios that I was going with, then I would go ahead and proceed with option number 3. Does that make sense, ladies and gentlemen? We're just going ahead and tackling this from as many different places as possible so you can think through this for your specific situation, okay? So here's another visual, okay? Again, you're seeing we're making as much effort as we can to provide you as much value as possible so you can see this from different angles and really make a sure decision about which option to go through, right? So scenario, 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 right? If this is my scenario, I would go with option number 1. If this was my scenario, dabbling on the side, focus on getting my first 1 to 3 paid clients for the next 6 to 12 months, I would go with option 2, okay? If this was my scenario, right? I had previous business experience, I had previous sales experience, I had previous clients, I might even currently have clients, okay? I'm worried about liability, I have $300 to $800 every single year. I'm certain that I'm going to get 1 to 3 paid clients in the next 3 to 6 months. I'm for sure going to be able to get 10 paid clients in the next 12 months, not test or practice clients, actual full paying clients. I would then go with option number 3. I hope that is absolutely clear. And the reason why this is so important to have absolutely clear before you move on to the next training section is because what we're going to be doing in the next training section is we're actually going to be walking you through the tactical step-by-step of, hey, if you went with option 1, this is what you're going to be doing. If you went with option 2, this is what you're going to be doing. If you went with option 3, this is what you're going to be doing. And so you do not want to move on from this training step, okay? You don't want to move on from this training section until you are absolutely clear as to what option you're going to move forward with. And here's the thing. If you have questions, ask in the community. Again, this is the reason why we've built this as a community program. And hey, if you are a pro at this, maybe you have some previous business experience, go out there and help others in the community who have questions on this as well, because you might be a pro at this, but there's going to be something inevitably, because in business, we all have deficits. There's going to be something that you're going to need help with. And so when you give that help to others, then you're going to be able to receive that help in the future for something else. Okay. So 100% clear. You got to be very, very, very sure about, hey, what is the decision I'm going to be going with? Because in the next training section, we're going to be walking you through the step-by-step for the actual action steps for each of those. Okay. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I told you, we're now in the practical. It's like, hey, what is my specific situation? No more la la land theoretical foundational concepts. You got the foundational understanding now. We're moving to the practical. Which one to start with? Make sure you are absolutely clear with your option. We will catch you in the next training section. All right, welcome to this training where we are going to be going step by step through each of the 3 options to go ahead and get your legal entity set up and opened up. Okay, so in the previous training, we did go ahead and talk about the 3 options when it comes to your legal entity. Now, to make this extremely clear, we did say that at the end of the previous training is that you do not want to continue with this training section if you have not made sure what option you will be going through with, right? Are you going to be going sole prop, no business bank account, sole prop with a business bank account, or are you going to go with the LLC route? Okay, so it's very important before you proceed to know which option you're going to be going with. Why? Because this training is literally going to not make any sense, because we're now going to go ahead and say, okay, if you chose option 1, here's the steps. If you chose option 2, here's the steps. So make sure you have that. Good? Got it? Awesome. Now let's go ahead and continue and talk about, okay, with each of the options, what is going to be the steps that you're going to follow? Of course, as always, we have our training disclaimer there. We are holding company. Any of our DBAs, we are not providing tax, legal, or accounting advice. All we are doing is educating you, so that way you can go out there and have an educated conversation with the professional that you may decide to deal with, or if you decide to do this on your own. So just a reminder, hey, this is not tax, legal, accounting advice. We're not tax, legal, accounting professionals. This is just general knowledge for information purposes only. Okay, so make sure that you are just being empowered to be your own advocate. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about option number 1, which is if you decide that, hey, I'm going to be proceeding with option 1. We've talked about all the scenarios of why you would go with option 1 in the previous training section. So what you're going to do is you're going to start the sole prop with no business bank account. Okay, so if this is going to be the option that you're going to proceed with, well, guess what? Literally, you are already a sole prop by default, okay? And so because you will not be transacting any money, there's also no need for you to have a business bank account, okay? Now, if you do need a refresher on, hey, what is a sole prop? Why are you automatically a sole prop? Make sure you go ahead and review that training. And then also, if you're like, hey, what scenario should I do option 1 with? Make sure you review the previous training as well, okay? So just make sure that if you are going with option 1, that you do not deal with any money coming in, okay? Otherwise, it is strongly recommended to go either with option 2 or maybe even with option 3, okay? Because as soon as you start dealing with money and it's all starting to go into your personal bank account, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually separate between, hey, what is your personal money and what is your business money? And so it's going to make it very difficult for you to even have business tax write-offs and all of that. And then if you think that you're going to have a lot of money coming in or going out, right? So if you're going to have business expenses and those kinds of things, then you would strongly consider option number 3, okay? But other than that, if you are going with option number 1, it's probably the easiest one, right? There's literally nothing that you got to do here, because you just go out, you're going to learn, you're going to explore, you're probably going to get some test and practice clients. Remember, no money dealing, but just test and practice clients, and you're going to have fun. Okay, so that's the easy one, option number 1. All right, so just to recap, we've now talked about option number 1 right over here. We're now going to move on to what is the step-by-step instructions for option number 2. Okay, so if you've decided that you are going to go with option number 2, which is the sole prop with a business bank account. Now, here's the thing. There's technically no legal entity that you need to set up, right? So there's no LLC or anything, because like we said, just like option number 1, by default, the US government, you are a sole prop automatically, right? But because you wanted to start dealing with money, and that's going to come in and out of your business, okay? So it is strongly recommended that you go ahead and actually set up a business bank account, and you can go ahead and use your social security number in order to do that. Now, how do you set up a business bank account? What are the options for setting up a business bank account? That is going to be coming up in a different training, okay? The actual step-by-step of that. But in this one, we're just walking you through the actual legal entity part of it, okay? Now, what about a DBA, okay? okay? So a DBA is known as doing business as. So if you're going to be conducting business in any other name outside of your first and last name, okay? So let's say, for example, your name is John Doe and you want to open up a bank account under John Wellness. What that means is that you will need to have a DBA. Now, a DBA is super cheap. It's super easy to get. A lot of times you can even get away with just getting it in your local county in your state. Every state and county is going to be different. A lot of times it's less than $50 like for a couple years or something like that. All you got to do is just do a quick Google search. Hey, county name, state, DBA. So let's say, for example, Collin County, Dallas, Texas, DBA or something like that, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to look for the county's website. You're going to look for something that is called doing business as DBA. It's sometimes also known as a fictitious name or an assumed name. And then all you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and file that, print the certificate, and then that way you can go to the bank with that certificate to go ahead and open up the business bank account under your DBA, if that is what you decide to do, okay? Sometimes in some states, you don't even need to register a DBA. So make sure that you check on that because that's not that big of a deal. A lot of times you can even just set up your business bank account under John Doe using your SSN. And then the DBA is something that you're just doing publicly and doing trading and business as that. So it's not even something you have to register. But again, don't quote me on that. You want to make sure that what is specific to the state that you are in. Now, in regards to an EIN, okay, so we did talk about the SSN, which is your social security number. Do you need an EIN for this option? Now, an EIN, we've talked about this previously. It's kind of like a social security number, but for a business, okay? Now, normally it is assigned to a corporation, kind of like an LLC or something like that, right, by the IRS. And it is required for all corporations that it is something that they can get for free via the IRS website. Now, it is not required to have an EIN as a sole prop because you are the business. That's the reason why your SSN is basically like your EIN because you're a sole prop, right? You are the business. Your social security number, it can be used everywhere. However, and this is kind of sometimes a little bit confusing, you can actually also technically get an EIN for your sole prop. Now, that doesn't mean that your sole prop has now become a corporation. It just is another option if you didn't want to use your SSN. Now, the only annoying part about that is that if you do decide that you're going to open up an EIN, okay, then if you decide that later on you're going to shift into option 3, you would also then have to close your EIN, okay? So that's why sometimes for a lot of people, it's just easier to use their SSN, their social security number, because obviously you're not going to close that. But unless you plan on staying a sole prop for a long period of time, it's probably better just to create your LLC when you're ready and have an EIN for that, rather than having to deal with, opening an EIN for your sole prop and then closing an EIN for your sole prop. That's kind of annoying, right? But again, we're just providing you the information so that way you can understand how all of this works, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much the step-by-step for option number 2, which is sole prop, which you are automatically, and then you'll get a business bank account, which we're going to talk about in upcoming training. You can decide if you want to get a DBA or not. You can decide if you want to get an EIN or not. That is literally as simple as it is, okay? So option number 1 was the easiest, literally do nothing and just have fun and, go have practice clients. Option number 2, very, very straightforward as well. You just decide, hey, do I want to do a DBA? Do I want to get an EIN? Which again, the answer to both of those is probably going to be no. And then all you do is just follow the training on opening a business bank account and you are rocking and rolling. So not a lot of delay there. That's option number 1 and that's option number 2. Now, let's talk about the granddaddy. Let's talk about option number 3 and actually opening up an LLC. Okay, so option number 3, which is starting an LLC and then filing for an S tax selection once you're at about $5,000 to $10,000 a month, $50,000 a year. Okay, so that's option number 3. Now, if option 3 is going to be the way that you are going to go, then what you will be doing is you will be setting up your legal entity. Now, that legal entity in the beginning, when you first set it up, is going to be a standard LLC when it comes to taxes. Now, when it comes to liability, there's only one type of LLC. LLCs are LLCs. They're corporations. They protect you from liability, right? But when it comes to taxes, when you first set up your LLC, you're probably not going to immediately file an S-Corp tax selection unless you are already at $50,000 a month and you hadn't actually set up your LLC previously, right? So for some of you, that might be the case. For some of you, like, you know what? I didn't know anything about this. I was running my entire business as a sole prop and I've been doing, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and I've been paying taxes out the wazoo. And so this business basics training empowered me to understand how this works. And so for you guys, if you are in that case where you are already running an existing business, then you're probably going to set up an LLC and immediately do an S-Corp tax selection. You can talk to your accounting professional about that. But for those of you who are just complete beginners, who are just completely starting out fresh, right? And if you decide to go with option 3, you're going to start an LLC and it's going to start off as just, hey, a normal standard LLC with no tax selection, okay? And then what happens here is that the question is, do I need to apply for an S-Corp tax election when I first open my LLC? And we've just answered that question, right? Unless you are already doing $50,000 to $100,000 in annual revenue, you will not need to file for that S tax election for your LLC just yet, okay? So you're just going to have a standard LLC, and then once you hit that $50,000, $100,000 in annual revenue, you'll then be able to convert your standard LLC that has no tax election retroactively into an LLC with an S tax election at the time of filling out the form and sending it out to the IRS. Now, it's important to know that this is only in the same fiscal year, right? So we're talking about, like, you can't say, cool, I started mine in November and now it's like March, and I want to get credit for all of the filings that I had since November. It doesn't work like that, right? It has to be within the same year, and you got to make that decision before December 31st if you are going to go ahead and actually retroactively convert your LLC. Now, it's important. Officially, the form is 2553, which is the S-Corp tax election form. Okay, that's the form. Normally, officially, it has to be filed with the IRS within the first 75 days of forming the entity or before March 15th. Okay, that is formally. But then you're like, hey, coach, you just told me I could do it any time in the year. Yes, if you have a legal or tax professional who knows what they are doing, okay, there are special IRS rulings with special documentation that allow you to retroactively convert your S-Corp election up to 1+ year, okay? So you might even be able to, depending on this filing, again, we're not tax and legal professionals. You got to talk to the person who knows what they're doing. You might actually be able to go ahead and get credit even before the December 31st deadline. It just depends on the rulings. And at the time of recording this, it's still valid and it has been valid for quite a while, but you got to talk to the legal and tax professional who will walk you through it officially. Okay, so if that's your case, make sure that you are, again, we're just educating you for this. Make sure you are consulting with the proper professionals who will be able to walk you through this. Beautiful. Okay, so option 3, you understand when it applies, you understand how it applies. What I'm now going to go ahead and walk you through is I'm going to go ahead and walk you through each of these individual steps, because for people who are doing this for the first time, it can kind of get confusing. Okay, so I'm going to quickly talk to you about the partnership LLC. If you are going to be running this as a partnership, if you have a business partner, we'll talk about that very quickly. We'll talk about naming your LLC. We're going to talk about the cost of opening an LLC. We're going to talk about some of the options that you have if you wanted to go ahead and set up your LLC if you're going with option number 3. We're going to warn you about some of the upsells that are going to happen, okay? Again, we're trying to equip you so that way you are empowered and you have the skills to understand this, so that way you don't get taken advantage of out there in the actual business environment, okay? And then also answer the question of, should you have a professional set up your LLC and your documents, okay? So let's go ahead and first talk about the partnership LLC. So if you are going to be going into a partnership with someone else, it is actually recommended to set up 2 LLCs, okay? So what's going to happen here is that you're going to have one LLC that is the partnership LLC. This is the LLC that is going to be owned 50-50 with you and your business partner, okay? And then you have your other LLC, and this is your own LLC, okay? So this is your own, okay? This is you. And this LLC owns 50% of that partnership LLC, and then your partner is also going to have, this is your partner, okay? Your partner. Your partner is also going to have their LLC, which is going to own 50% there. This is usually, it's sometimes called the trifecta. This is usually the most bulletproof way to set up a partnership, is using this format. But again, if you do need, if it sounds complicated, again, we're not here to explain all of the details around this. You are going to want to go ahead and make sure that you are talking to the tax and legal professional. They'll be able to walk you through this. And then of course, if you guys need us to be able to bring in resources additionally, make sure you let us and the community know, because there might be other people who are in the community who have more experience with this, who can share their experience, okay? But for most of the people who are watching this training, this may not be relevant, but I did just want to go ahead and touch on it very, very quickly, okay? So that is the partnership LLC, the best way to set up a partnership. Next up, let's talk about naming your LLC, okay? So if you set up your LLC properly, you will never need another LLC for yourself ever again. Now, you might decide to set up other LLCs for different kind of projects that you decide to do, right? As you start to grow in your business, where you have, like I said before, you have your LLC, which is you, right? And then you decide, you know what? I want to go ahead and invest into this project. I want to invest into this project. I want to invest into this project. Each of these will have their own individual LLCs. So let's say, for example, this is a partnership. This is going to be like a real estate property that I own. This is going to be XYZ. All of these are going to be other individual LLCs, okay, that are owned by my main LLC. But what I'm saying here is that if you set up this LLC properly, you will never need another LLC for yourself ever again. Why? Because what you're going to do is you're just going to go ahead and use the same LLC. And then once your income gets to that level, all you do is add that S Corp tax selection. And then all you do is you run your income through that LLC. So all of the income from all these other LLCs comes through your main LLC. Now, naming this LLC right here is not that big of a deal either. And really, quite frankly, it's not a big deal to name any LLC. Why? Because you can just use a DBA. So let me actually show you what I mean by this. Okay. So let's say, for example, this LLC right here. Let's say I go ahead and name this, John Doe Holdings. Okay. John Doe Holdings. Okay. So GDH. All right. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to go ahead and set up a wellness company with this specific LLC. Well, all you do is you just file a DBA, and now you just say, hey, I'm going to have another name, and this is going to be called John Wellness. And that's it. And so now this LLC has multiple names. And so a lot of times people are like, okay, so that means that I got to put a lot of thought into what this name with this corporate legal entity is going to be. No, in fact, even for us, our LLC is named something general, and then we actually have DBAs for each of our individual brands. And so here's the thing. Sometimes you're going to shift through different brand names, okay? And sometimes you might not want to use a brand name anymore, right? And what you do is you don't have to go out there and then shut down the entire LLC. You got to go ahead and do that. No. All you do is you file for another DBA, okay? And so this is the reason why we talked about this previously, where your brand is separate from your legal entity. We talked about this when we talked about choosing your brand name, okay? And so what you do is a lot of times you set up your LLC with a general name, and then you just switch out the DBAs according to what brand that you might be running for your business right now. So these two are separate, and so you don't have to worry too much about like, okay, I got to pick the perfect brand name, or I got to pick the perfect LLC name or something like that. It's not that big of a deal because you can just have DBAs for different brand names, okay? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I wanted to talk to you about when it comes to naming your LLC. We've now talked about the partnership LLC. We've talked about naming your LLC. Let's next up talk about the cost of opening an LLC. So when it comes to opening an LLC, there are two major costs, okay? Part one is going to be the state filing fee. This is the fee that you cannot get around. For every state, it is going to be different, okay? So let's say, for example, in California, an LLC is around $800 a year, okay? In Texas, an LLC is $400 one time, okay? Again, it depends. Now, normally, it is recommended to go ahead and file for that LLC in your state of residence, okay? Now, don't get caught up. There's a lot of people, when you go down this rabbit hole, it's like, okay, I'm going to set up a Delaware or a Wyoming LLC or a Nevada LLC, and I'm going to avoid these taxes, and I'm going to do this and all this kind of stuff. I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10 is just some kind of loophole or something that you're trying to get too much confusion that's going to go on there, okay? However, of course, you can talk to your tax professional, but normally what you are going to do is you're going to set up your LLC in the state of your residence. That is the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, you are going to have to get a registered agent, which is a whole another complication where you got to get a registered agent to get your mail in that residence and all this kind of stuff, okay? However, regardless of where you set up your LLC, there is going to be a state filing fee, okay? Now, the second fee is what is known as the service fee. Now, this service fee is whatever the lawyer or the firm that you're going to pick in order to set everything up is going to do. Now, sometimes these fees, depending on how complex of an LLC that you are setting up, or if you're doing a partnership LLC or how many LLCs you're setting up, sometimes it can be a couple $100 or sometimes it can be a couple $1,000, okay? So it just depends. But the point is that there are two parts to this. Part one, and then there is part two. Now, you can go ahead and really kind of stumble your way through this and avoid the service fee altogether, right? So there are services, and one of the options we're going to walk you through is going to be like, for example, LegalZoom.com, where they do have an option where all you do is you do all the paperwork on their site yourself, and then really all you got to do is just go ahead and take care of the state filing fee. But again, that's you stumbling your way through there and saving on the service fee. If you decide that you want to do that and you want to save on some money and you don't have that much funds and you're a little bit savvy with all that stuff, by all means, when we get to the options, you'll see that that is an option, okay? But I want to make it clear, you will still have to pay the state filing fee regardless, okay? So there is no being able to save on that, okay? So I hope I'm very, very clear on that right now, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the cost of opening an LLC. We've talked about the state filing fee as well as the service fee, two parts of that. So we've talked about this, we've talked about this, we've now talked about this. Now, let's actually get into the options for setting up your LLC. So when setting up your LLC, there are a couple different options that you can actually explore. Okay. Now what we are doing is our goal here is to educate you and empower you and provide you different options so you can decide what is going to be best for you. Okay. So you got LegalZoom.com, you got ZenBusiness.com. You can also find a local CPA or a corporate professional. And then there's also an option number 4, which is Prime Corporate Services. Now this is actually a lot of times in our community, people get stuck, right? And so what we did is we said, you know what, we're going to go out there and just find an option that is going to be like, hey, yeah, we're going to kind of recommend them, but at the end of the day, we're going to give you the option to decide if you want to go ahead and work with them or not. Okay, so we're going to explain to you Prime Corporate Services in just a second, and that is going to be a potential option if you decide you want to go through with that as well. Now, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut over really quickly to the LegalZoom.com website and as well as the Zen Business website. I'm going to show you what it might look like right now at the time of recording this. Again, they're going to change things all the time, but I'm just going to walk you through what it might look like there. So if you decide that you want to go with option 1 or option 2, what that might look like, and then kind of taking it from there. Okay, so here we are on the LegalZoom website. Here, what you will notice is that if I scroll down, you will see that that is what we were talking about right here, right? So if you wanted to do it on your own, they have the option where, hey, it's $0, but you got to go through all the forms yourself, okay? But you still have to pay the state filing fee. So it's not free. It's still, free, no service fee, but you're still paying the state filing fees, right? Here, this is the $249 where they're getting you set up with some of the other, kind of like operating agreements and that kind of stuff, where they're going to help you get that stuff set up, but you still have to pay the state filing fees. Okay. Now, the option that we're going to have with you guys, we're going to show you in just a second with Prime Corporate Services, they actually have a really cool offer where they're going to waive the service fee and going to get you set up only for the state filing fee. So that's going to be another option where I'll show you. But again, I wanted to walk you through the LegalZoom option on here, right? And then they got the $299 with the state filing fees, and they got a whole bunch of stuff here as well. Now, be very, very careful. I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to mention it again when we get into the upsell warning, okay? Because a lot of these people, they're going to be like, yo, we're going to go ahead and get you set up with your online presence website, and we're going to get you set up with this and that. Do not go for any of this stuff. Do not fall for any of these upsells. Do not end up buying your domain on this kind of stuff, because we're walking you through a system that is going to be working all together. And in a second, I'll talk to you about some of the warnings around, some of these upsells that happen on here, okay? Next up, let's now talk about over here, Zen Business, okay? So they got a very similar setup on here. They got $0 plus state filing fees. They got $199 plus state filing fees, and they got $349 plus state filing fees, okay? So they got some kind of a delay on here. If you do the free option plus the state filing fees, can take a couple weeks. They got a couple days on here, right? So they got a couple different filings on here. This option with the $199 per year. So they do the per year on here, right? So they got you on the hook. So then you got to pay the state filing fees per year, and you got to pay Zen Business per year. Okay. So they got you by this operating agreement on here. And I think they're just kind of doing a money grab there. That's what it looks like. And then over here, they got Upsell Palooza going on over here, okay? Again, I'm going to warn you about this in just a second, but again, be very careful. Do not fall for any of these upsells. No. Because what they are going to do is they're going to go ahead and get you onto some random platform. You're like, okay, hey, I bought my domain name here. I got my business email address here. And then you're not going to be able to get your business started because you're going to be all over the place. So only if you decide to use these kind of Zen Business and, LegalZoom and that kind of stuff, only use them for what they are good with, which is the legal side of things. So with that being said, let's go ahead and cut back over to the main training. All right, we're back. So that was option 1 and option 2. Again, not the best options, but I just wanted to show you what the options were on there. Now, I'll be honest, option 3, it might actually be a very attractive option for a lot of you, where if you just go over to Google Maps and you just find a local accountant, a local tax professional, a local attorney, somebody like that, a lot of times what you can do is you can find somebody who maybe runs a small mom and pop shop. And the benefit of going with option 3 is that you can actually then go ahead and ask them a lot of questions. And I remember when I first started in business, like over a decade ago, right? We didn't have options like all these other things that we're going to show you with Prime Corporate Services, which I think is an awesome option if you decide to go with that. But 10 years ago, it was like, hey, I just drove around and I had Google Maps and I was like, hey, I'm going to find somebody who's a mom and pop. And there was, this nice lady. She was a CPA for a very long time. And I just, asked her a bunch of questions and she helped me learn the entire process. And I had a kind of, one-on-one in-person communication with her. So that way it helped me learn a lot of the steps around this as well, right? So it was something in person. It made it very real. And I would have an appointment with her so I could actually ask her a bunch of questions. And because she was a mom and pop, she didn't mind, right? So again, for a lot of you, option 3 might also be a very good option, okay? Now, let's go ahead and talk about option 4, because option 4, I think, is also potentially going to be an awesome option for a lot of you. But before we do, I do want to go ahead and do that upsell warning right now, okay? Because all of these companies, no matter what company it is, right? LegalZoom, Zen Business, even Prime Corporate Services, they are going to try and upsell you stuff sometimes, okay? Sometimes it might be unrelated to your LLC. Now, I want you to listen to this very carefully, especially when it comes to LegalZoom and Zen Business and all these like bigger companies, okay? Maybe not Prime as much, but definitely these bigger companies. Do not purchase anything that is related to things like business website, domain, business email address, or anything like that, okay? Because these companies, LegalZoom, Zen Business, they understand the legal and accounting side of things, okay? Now, what they're going to do is they're going to try to sell you on like, hey, you're going to need a business website builder, or you're going to need a business domain, or you're going to need a business email. Do not make this mistake. Now, if you're not sure, make sure you ask in the community. That's why the community is there for you. But I cannot tell you how much headache we have had to deal with other students or new business owners who are literally getting into this game, made a mistake because they got sold on all this upsell stuff, and now they have this terrible spider web of random services that they purchased, and they're like, okay, I got to get my business set up, and now they got to connect all this stuff together. It's a massive headache when it is all scattered, okay? This is the reason why we are walking you through a system, and I was saying this earlier, but I want to make this very clear right now again, okay? We're walking you through a system that works all together. You do not want to mess it up by trying to piecemeal the system here and there, okay? So this is the reason why you're in the program. We've been there, we've done that. We're going to make sure that you get the best recommendations according to the industry that you are in, so that way everything runs easily and seamlessly, okay? You do not want headaches that are going to stop you from getting your business set up properly, okay? Very important. This is your business, your income, your future. You want to make sure you're setting up properly, so please follow the instructions that you are being provided, okay? Do not say we didn't warn you. Don't come to us later on and say, hey, you know, I got my domain name from here, and I got my website from here, and I got my email from here. Help me get it all set up. Okay, you're going to have literally a bunch of money wasted. You're going to have to set it all up again. And so just be patient, because in the upcoming trainings, we are going to walk you through, hey, how do you set up your business platform? How do you get your business website set up? How do you get all of that set up? Before right now, we are only talking about the LLC. And then soon, we're going to get into the trainings about, hey, where do you get your business website, email marketing, email domain, all of that kind of stuff. We're going to go ahead and walk you through it very shortly. Okay, now with that being said, here's the other question. Then we'll go ahead and walk through the Prime Corporate Services option on here. Should you have your LLC and your documents set up by a professional? Now, this is completely up to you, okay? And your situation, how much funds you have, how much you want to figure this out on your own, how much you want to learn on your own. Everyone's situation is going to be different, okay? We are here to just provide you options, and you can decide on what you want to do with this, okay? Now, in my situation, if I was going to be doing this all over again, I have some funds now, I would say, you know what? I'm going to do it, have a legal professional do it, because of the fact that it's going to be easier and I don't have to worry about it being set up properly. But again, it's up to you and your own decision, okay? So let's talk about the option for Prime Corporate Services. Now, again, the reason why we are providing this option is because so many in our community would get stuck when setting up their LLC, and they would end up going with LegalZoom or, you know, Zen Business or any of these other ones, and then they just kind of all get confused and not sure what to do. And so what we did is we went out and we found a company that actually does this. Okay, now to be clear, what we are doing is all we're doing is providing you the option if you want to use them. It's completely up to you if you decide you want to use their services or not. So who is Prime Corporate Services? They've been in business for over 10 years. They've helped over 100,000 entrepreneurs structure their legal entities and save thousands in taxes. They have an entire team of over 50 corporate advisors who literally specialize only on corporate structures and entity formation. So they're very good at what they do. Here are the founders, Steve and Tommy. Okay, we have spoken to them. They know that we would be sending students or people who go through the program, new business owners, over their way. But again, we're just providing this as an option. It's totally up to you. It's your business, your life, what you want to do. And so what they've done is they put together a special offer for our community. Okay. So they say that this is valued at $2,000. Now, when you do that, not only will they create the LLC for you, but they will also go ahead and take care of the IRS filing. They'll go ahead and make sure that all of the expediting fees will be taken care of as well. And then in addition to that, they're also going to make sure that all of the legal documentation and the IRS registration is taken care of for you as well. So normally when you have an LLC set up, you then then have to go out and prepare these documents, submit them to the IRS, and then get your EIN, right? And so these are the things that these people are going to prepare for you. They're going to prepare the articles of organization and the operating agreement. They're going to have that legally prepared, okay? And then they're also going to go ahead and get that EIN number for you. And you're going to get this as a package all together for you, okay? And then the third thing as a part of this offer that they've put together for the community is a corporate advisor. So if you decide to work with them, they are going to assign you with a corporate advisor so you can get support and questions asked as well, okay? Now, what's the catch, right? So here's the thing. Obviously, this is going to be a way for them to get new clients. And so what they are doing is they are offering to the community something that's really, really awesome. Now, the reason they are doing that is because they are hoping that you like working with them. And so that way they can actually go ahead and tell you, hey, you know what? We have these other services. You're now a business owner. We want you to go ahead and work with us, right? So when you schedule a call with them, we are warning you, they will obviously be trying to sell you on other things, okay? Obviously, they're doing this because in exchange for getting your LLC set up, they're going to try and wow you and try to get them to use their other legal, credit, and accounting services. Now, I'm going to make this very, very clear. It is completely up to you if you decide that you want to work with them, okay? This is the reason why we are giving you so many different options on how you want to proceed, okay? And so we're going to make this clear. We and Prime are completely separate companies, okay? We are not the same company. We have nothing to do with their operation and how they deal with their business. We don't even know how they run the internals of their company. We are just here to provide options. Now, if they try to upsell you or sell you a bunch of other stuff, okay, we have already warned you ahead of time that obviously they're not going to be giving out free LLCs left and right. And so if they try to upsell you or sell you on services that you don't understand, what you can do instead is, as an entrepreneur, you can flex your resourcefulness muscles and you can be curious. You can ask questions. You can try to understand, hey, if what they are providing is actually something that's going to be useful for you or not. Again, you have the agency to make that decision because you can be resourceful and be critically thinking on your own. And so if you don't understand, that's okay. Just don't buy anything extra, right? Just take a step back, do some research, reach out to others in the community for clarity. This is the reason why we are here to provide you options so that way you are empowered and it is completely up to you if you decide to work with them or not. Okay, so with that being said, how do you schedule the call with Prime and get access to those bonuses? What's going to happen is that underneath this training section in the description, there's going to be a link. You have to use this link if you want to get access to this special offer, okay? So this special offer, again, complimentary LLC, you got to cover the hard costs. You're going to get all the legal filings and everything taken care of for you. And so you can use that link in order to get that. Now, a couple points on here. Note one, right now, Prime is only a US-based company. So if you live in Canada and you're looking to open a Canadian corporation, please do not schedule a call with Prime. They are unable to help set up Canadian corporations currently, okay? Number two, only schedule a call with Prime if you are sure that you want to proceed with option number 3 and you are ready to go ahead and start your LLC, okay? So we've walked you through all of the different options. If you are sure that you're ready to start your LLC and you're like, you know what? These guys are going to help me get it set up complimentary. They're going to go ahead and cover the hard cost. I understand that on the phone, they're going to try and talk to me about some of the other services, but this is obviously in exchange for them helping me out with this awesome offer. And so if you understand all of that, then go ahead and proceed with scheduling a call with Prime, okay? If you're going to be going with option 1 or option 2, you got to make sure that you are following the steps for those options. This call with Prime Corporate Services is only for option number 3, okay? Now, note number 3, I want to go ahead and make clear. If you decide that you are going to work with Prime to have your LLC set up and you schedule a call, make sure that you show up and be professional, okay? Even though we are here to provide different options for different companies, what's going to happen is that Prime is going to know that you came from this community and from this program. And so, yes, most people show up to their appointment and are professional. So we just ask that you please show up and be professional like most people, because you don't want to go on there and just be like this terrible, be like one of those exception people who just shows up and they don't show up on time. They're not professional, because those are, quite frankly, the people who are the wantrepreneurs. And definitely you do not want to be in that category. Man, oh man, oh man. We got through all the options for setting up an LLC. You can see why we went ahead and had to create this training, because of the fact that there are quite a few options out there, okay? So again, you have many options. You do not have to work with Prime, nor are we saying that you should or shouldn't. It's completely up to you. We just want to make sure that you are provided with the options so that way you can actually get through this legal stuff and actually move on to the actual money-making part. Yes, this legal stuff is annoying, but it is also important, okay? So we went ahead and warned you about the upsells. We went ahead and walked you through some options. Is there an option 5, an option 6, an option 7? Absolutely. There are so many different options that you can explore to get your LLC live. We just wanted to go ahead and walk you you through some of the ones that are going to be obvious. And so with that being said, now, ladies and gentlemen, we have gone ahead and talked about the partnership LLC, naming your LLC, opening and the cost of opening an LLC, the options, the upsell warning, should you have a professional do it. All of what we've talked about is regarding option number 3. Now, as we start to close out this training, I want to go ahead and answer a very quick question. What if my situation was different than what was in the training? Now, first off, obviously that's the reason why we've built this program as a community-based program. So you can just go ahead and reach out to other members in the community and get answers that way, okay? And the other thing is, hey, how do you think we learned a lot of the stuff that you're learning inside of this training? Yes, we met with our CFO. Yes, we've been in business for a long time. Yes, we went ahead and kind of put this together based off our experience. Yes, that is all true. However, because we did it does not mean that you cannot do it either, right? So what that means is that, hey, you should not be and follow 100% blindly. What you can do is you can say, you know what? I'm going to go out and find somebody in my local area. I'm going to go ahead and educate myself. Or you know what? I'm not going to be a remote control business owner. I'm not going to be spoon-fed and follow blindly. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and be resourceful. I'm going to search up on Google. I'm going to search up on YouTube. I'm going to ask my questions. I'm going to ask ChatGPT my questions, right? Especially nowadays with AI, it's so much easier, especially taxes, right? Like anytime I have a tax or legal question, I go to ChatGPT and ChatGPT explains it to me a little bit easier. Again, I don't necessarily take it to be 100%, but at least it equips me and empowers me to have the background information to then be able to go and talk to a professional. And so I guarantee you, if you replaced your social media time, your dead time, your Netflix time, all that stuff with books and audiobooks and educational material related to business and entrepreneurship and taxes, within a week, you'd be learning so much very, very, very quickly. Okay. So again, if your situation does not match exactly, obviously tap into the community, but then also do some resourcefulness research on your own to be able to find out, hey, what else can I learn about this to empower myself rather than just asking for a handout and saying, hey, I don't know what's going on here. I'm just going to be a victim in this entire situation. Because at the end of the day, if there's somebody else on the planet who has figured it out, why can't I, right? And so if you have that mindset, trust me, you will be rocking and rolling. And of course, at the end of the day, like we said, we do have that option for Prime Corporate Services. So if you decide you want to go ahead and ask them questions, obviously you can ask them questions as well. Beautiful. Now, as we close out this training, I do want to just go ahead and remind you, this is going to be very important. And probably right after this, we're going to have another training that's going to walk you through this, which is, hey, are you waiting for your corporation now? No, what you want to do is get this process started in the background, right? And so what you want to do, that's the reason why we went ahead and put this corporation training where we did, is because of the fact that we said, hey, we don't want students or we don't want new business owners who are going through this program to say, you know what, I set up my website, I set up my email, I set up all this stuff that you guys told me to set up, and now I got to sit around for a bunch of weeks in order to get my corporation set up. We're going ahead and planting the seed, getting you started on your corporation, but you are not looking for an excuse to sit around. You're going to get this process started, and then guess what? You're going to get right back in there. Maybe a day, maybe 2 days, you're going to get this process started, right? And then while you're waiting, you're not just sitting around. You're going to be getting the rest of your business basics and your foundation set up. So that way you are in momentum and you are taking action. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this has been a little bit of a longer training, but we had a lot to go through. Option 1, option 2, option 3. We've talked about all the tactical, the step-by-step of opening your legal entity. Make sure you go ahead and take those action steps, get this set up. So that way we can get it out of the way and we can get on to the awesome stuff, which is all about the marketing and the sales and the rest of your business basics. With that being said, we got a couple other training sections left in this training. We will catch you in the next training section. All right, my friendly Canadians, welcome to this training, which we're going to be talking about the legal entities in Canada. Now, I'm assuming if you are going through this training section, it's because you are a Canadian new business owner. Now, I don't know if you're a United States new business owner, why you would be watching this, but hey, maybe we got some of those as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what legal entities in Canada look like. So the first thing you got to know is that the Canadian system, when it comes to legal entities, is so much more simpler than the United States. Now, why is that the case? We will talk about that in just a second. But what you got to know is that although unincorporated entities are pretty much the same in Canada as well, so everything that we have talked about in the main training, okay, so just because you are a Canadian new business owner does not mean that it is not helpful and actually probably required for you to go through the rest of the main training, because a lot of the things are going to be the same. And even the stuff that is not the same, that is not located in Canada, is very helpful for you to understand about how the US legal entity system works, because a lot of times you're going to be doing business in the United States sometimes. And so that's the reason why it's very helpful to know that. Okay, so the unincorporated entities, sole prop and partnership, they they are the same in Canada as well. So you'll see here, unincorporated, basically the entities that are not corporations, those are the same for both the United States and Canada, sole prop and partnership, okay? Now, the incorporated, aka the corporations, those are really the main ones that are different. And in Canada, there is really only one main corporation, which is the Canadian Controlled Private Corporation, CCPC, okay, is what they call it, okay? And so visually, this is what that entire kind of entity situation looks like on here, right? So we got over here, the non-corporation legal entities, those are the same. And then it's really on the corporation level where there is quite a big difference between the Canadian system and the US system. Now, the other thing you should know about the CCPC is that it works very similar to the C Corp that is located here in the United States, in which there is a separation between the owners and the profits, and there is no pass-through. Now, we haven't talked about in this training what a pass-through entity is. It's a little bit more advanced. We'll talk about it when we talk about tax and legal mastery, which is a whole separate course, okay? So, like for example, an S Corp and an LLC are typically pass-through entities, typically because sometimes an LLC can sometimes be a C Corp. But the point being is that a C Corp here is a non-pass-through entity, meaning that the profits, the revenue, XYZ does not pass through to the owners, right? So there is like a hard separation there between the owners and the actual profit of the company, right? And so the CCPC in the Canadian system works very similarly to that as the C Corp in the US system. Now, it is also important, that's the reason why we have this asterisk right over here, is that technically in Canada, they actually separate between a private corporation and a public corporation, right? But for the purposes of what we're talking about, that's not really that important, right? So at CCPC, technically there's like two types of CCPCs. There can be a private one or a public one. A public one is going to be one that's publicly traded. But again, for, new business owners, for you who might be kind of going through this training, right? If you're running a massive company that has, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, you're probably not listening to me for your legal and tax professional advice, especially if you're in Canada, right? So that's the point, is that for all intents and purposes, if you're a Canadian student and you decide to go down the route of having a corporation, it is probably going to be a private corporation, okay? Now, the other interesting thing is that even in Canada, it kind of works almost kind of identical to the US system in many ways, right? So there is also the equivalent of the US's IRS, right? So the Internal Revenue Service is the IRS that manages all of the accounting, kind of all of the taxes, all that stuff. And so in Canada, there is the Canadian Revenue Service, the CRA, okay? And then in the United States, we have the Social Security system. And then in Canada, there is the Canadian Pension Plan, okay? Now, the content of this specific training section that we are going to talk about really only applies to the types of businesses that do not have a U.S. permanent establishment, okay, or a PE, which is an office or a branch. What do I mean by this? So what we mean by this is that if a company has a physical location, let's say, for example, they're a Canadian company, okay, they're in Canada, and they have a physical location in the United States, there is a whole bunch of other legality around how they're going to have not only a Canadian corporation, but they're also going to have a US subsidiary. Okay, so this case, right, this option right here is not what this training section is applicable for, right? If you are in the situation in which you're going to have a US office and you're actually located in Canada, that is going to require a whole bunch more complexity, and you're going to need to make sure that you actually go out there and get that specified advanced knowledge. Okay, so the other thing I will go ahead and put a disclaimer on, and we'll get into the training disclaimer in just a second, which is the big one, which is, hey, do your own research, right? Do not take our word for it. This is just general knowledge and information in terms of our experience, but we do not know as much about the Canadian system as we do about the US system. Okay, and so there is that training disclaimer here, right? So we, our holding company, or DBA, we are not providing tax, legal, or accounting advice. We are not tax, legal, or accounting professionals. This has been prepared for general knowledge and information purposes only. And so you want to take these as just examples, so that way you are empowered, and that way you can actually talk to the professionals. Now, the common question that Canadian students would have as they're going through this corporation training, right? So all of the training sections that we have talked about thus far, some Canadian new business owners are going to say, hey, you know what? Does that mean that I should not go through all of those other trainings, right? We talked about the sole prop, we talked about the corporation, the benefits of a corporation, we talked about the LLC, we talked about the different options that exist on there, right? And so the answer to that question is that the training that you have been going through and the training that has been applicable. If you haven't gone through it, make sure you go back through all of that, especially if you're a Canadian business owner. It's going to be just as important for the Canadian business owners as well. Why? Because the entire training that we are discussing is about when to incorporate, okay? And so when we are getting into the sections about sole prop versus LLC, all of that kind of stuff, for you, instead of it being an LLC, it's just going to be sole prop versus CCPC, okay? Whether you're going to incorporate with a corporation. And so again, the topic is the same. It's just a slightly different term, okay? Now, there also might be other slight variations that you can go out and have about the same conversation. That's where if you go over to YouTube, right, you just type in, hey, how to open a business bank account in Canada as a sole proprietorship, how to open a CCPC business bank account as a corporation. All of that is going to be available for you. There's an amazing amount of resources out there to empower yourself with. Again, not to necessarily take tax and legal advice from, but just to be empowered in general is going to be extremely beneficial, okay? Now, the good news of all of this and what we're talking about here is that every single part of the training that we have been talking about is identical. And from what we know, the general information about sole prop in Canada works very much similar to the United States. And so even though it's not exactly identical, like we said, the LLC is going to be something that can be replaced with the CCPC. Again, I know it's not exactly the same. However, it would still provide the liability benefits and the tax benefits to a certain revenue level, just like a US corporation would. Now, the other good news about all of this is that the Canadian system, because it is so much more simpler than the US system, you are not going to have to necessarily worry about, you know, how there's the LLC retroactive, kind of like going ahead and filing that form and doing all that stuff that we talked about in the LLC training. Well, there is none of that in the Canadian system, right? So obviously that is a pro because it's simpler, but it's a con because it has less tax saving benefits. But again, for Canadian new business owners, the entire process is much simpler and easier to navigate and even much easier to implement. So again, if you go ahead and type in how to incorporate in Canada in the YouTubes, you are going to find so many awesome resources all about that. And I promise you in the beginning, like we talked about many times before, it's a skill, and skill equals knowledge times reps. And so as you go ahead and get more knowledge, and then you go ahead and actually put the more repetition, that your skill related to all of this is going to go ahead and increase. Okay, so don't get overwhelmed by this. You just kind of got to marinate within it, right? You just got to go ahead and consume as you're kind of getting more and more of this. And you're going to start to notice patterns, similarities between some of the different topics that different people are talking about, and that's going to help you navigate this so much easier. Now, as we close out this training, because some people have a question, is like, hey, why the heck is the Canadian system so much simpler? Is it because of the fact that the Canadians have it all figured out? Is it because of the fact that, you know what, us Americans, we got to be a lot more like the Canadians because they have so much more of a simpler system? Well, let's go into this, okay, real quick. And I'm not going to go into this too far, but I just want you to understand is that two reasons. Number one, that Canada literally has 10 times less the population of the United States. Okay, let me explain to you what that means. So the state of California, okay, which is one of the states that we have in the United States, the single state of California has a population that is greater than the entire country of Canada, okay? In California, there are 39 million people. In the entire Canadian country, there are only 38 million people, okay? And so when I say that why is the Canadian system so much more simpler, right? Reason number one is that the US has 10 times the population, right? In America, there's 331 million people compared to 38 million in Canada. And so what ends up happening here is that because you got 10 times the population, I would say we're not 10 times more complicated. I would say we're probably like 2 or 3 times more complicated, which is, you know, if you compare the two, like 10 times the population with the system that is only 2 or 3 times more complex, hey, that's pretty good, right? And then the second reason is that in the United States, we have 30x the number of businesses, okay? And so in Canada, there are 1.3 million employer businesses versus in the United States, there are 31.7 million businesses. Okay. So we got 30 times the number of businesses. Okay. 30x. And so for a country that has 10x more people and 30x more businesses, the system is probably going to have to be a little bit more complex in order to manage the additional amount of volume that exists, right? Probably, right? And so I just want to go ahead and make that clear because sometimes I'm like, you know, I hear from students sometimes like, you know what, we as the United States, we should be more like, you know, we should be more like Sweden or Denmark or Canada. But you got to also understand that the complexity and the additional volume and the population, that adds a lot more to the system, right? When you have a lot more human beings, just trying to get 10 human beings, right? If you ever done a family reunion or something like that, or navigated a trip and trying to get your friends to all come on a trip with you, you know that just trying to get like 5 or 10 or 15 people or even 20 people is like a massive headache in terms of organization, right? Imagine if you're talking about 10 times the population or 30 times the number of businesses. Of course, it's going to be a lot more complex, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been this training in regards to the legal entities in Canada. Again, they're a lot more simpler, but you still do want to make sure that you go through the main training, because for anything, it is going to be extremely beneficial for you to understand how the US system works, because there is a lot of benefit even for Canadian business owners to understand, hey, how does the US system work? Because chances are you are going to be coming across inside of your career opportunities that are availing themselves to the neighbors in the United States, because the United States has such a bigger economy. There's a lot of opportunity that if you understand this, which a lot of Canadians don't take the time to understand, which if you understand it, there's a lot more opportunity that you are able to tap into if you decided that you are going to go in that route. But again, in Canada, there's plenty of opportunity as well. So it's not like something that you got to think and say, oh man, I can't actually make it in Canada. Of course, that is not true, but we just wanted to go ahead and explain to you how the foundations work. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the legal entities in Canada. We will catch you in the next training section. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this training section where we're talking about if you are waiting for your corporation, right? Does that mean that you're going ahead and getting your corporation registered? Maybe you're waiting for the IRS. Maybe you're waiting for the accountant. Maybe you're waiting for something. Well, you want to make sure you're watching this, because we have some very important information that you need to make sure that once your corporation is registered, there's some important documents that you need to save, because you are going to need them in the upcoming. In addition to that, I want to go ahead and remind you, because we made this very, very clear, is the reason why we have gone ahead and designed this course in the way that we have, so that way you work on the corporation stuff earlier on, is so that way you can get this process started. But that does not mean that you just sit around and twiddle your thumbs. It means that you're getting this process started, and then in the background, you can be working on the rest of your business. We learned this after literally being in the trenches with thousands of students and helping many people go through this process, and we ourselves going through this process, and then hearing what some students were stuck with in the community. And then all of that is what made us make this decision to put the corporation training earlier in the program. In addition to that, I want to go ahead and make this clear. If you are getting an LLC, when you register your LLC with the IRS, okay, so first you go out and you register your LLC with the state, and then once you register your LLC with the state, you then go out and register your LLC with the IRS, okay? When you are registering it with the IRS, they are going to send you in the mail, they're going to send you something as an EIN registration letter, okay? Now, what this EIN registration letter is it tells you exactly what your business name is according to what is registered in the IRS's system, as well as what your EIN is, as well as what your mailing address and business address for the purposes of the IRS is as well, okay? Now, this is what I want to go ahead and make clear. That letter, that registration letter that they send you, you need to make sure that you keep it with you and you keep it safe, okay? Because you're going to need it later on in your business when we help you get set up with the business bank account, as well as, very importantly, when you submit an application to get a business phone number for business phone number text messaging. Now, this stuff might not make sense to you right now. Don't worry about it. It'll make sense once we actually get to that training and walk you through it A to Z, step by step. But the point is that I want to go ahead and remind you to keep that letter safe, because otherwise, later on, you are going to then have to go out and call the IRS and get that letter, and then they have to fax it to you, and then you got to find a fax machine, because who has fax machines nowadays? Or you got to wait for them to actually mail it to you, and you got to wait a bunch of time, and then all of a sudden really just spending and wasting all this time, right? So that's the reason why I'm going to tell you from the beginning right now, because in a couple trainings from now, you're going to be like, hey, you need this IRS letter, and you're going to be like, oh man, I lost the IRS letter. Make sure that you are keeping the IRS letter safe. That's number one, okay? And then number two, keep on going. You got to go ahead and get your business platform set up. We got to get your business website set up. We got to get your new client agreement set up. All of this you can do while you are waiting for this whole corporation stuff to happen. So there's no reason why you cannot immediately, right after this training section, jump directly into the next training and start building the rest of your business. I'm going to make this 1,000% clear. Do not wait for the corporation stuff to be complete before moving on. Work in the background. You want to make sure that you are keeping on moving forward. This is the difference between those who are the entrepreneurs and those who are the professional entrepreneurs. The professional entrepreneurs are not looking for an excuse to not have to work, right? They keep moving, they keep the momentum moving. Now, I'm not saying that you should just skip over this corporation stuff because it's important, right? This is your business, this is your income, this is your future. We're not saying like, hey, do a half-done job. No. Do a good job in the corporation stuff, but don't wait for an excuse to actually continue moving through everything else, okay? So yes, this corporation legal stuff can sometimes be annoying, sometimes frustrating, but it's important, and it's important in business to make sure that you do right, but also not to use it as an excuse to not get other work done as well, okay? So make sure you do continue with the rest of the trainings, and just remember that this entire program was built as a community-based program. And so while you're also waiting for the corporation stuff to happen, and as you're going through the rest of the trainings, you want to make sure that you are working on your give to ask ratio. You are working on your relationship bank account. What does that mean? It means that, let's say, for example, you figure all this stuff out, and there's other people inside of the community who need help. The more you give when you do not need, so when you go out to ask, you actually have a bank account, you have an emergency fund that you can tap into. And you're only going to have that fund if you're investing in it ahead of time. And so we've said this many times before, there is no guru on the mountain. Everything that you are learning inside of this course is only because of the fact that we went out and learned it either from other community members or we did something ourselves and then we went ahead and verified it with the community members. Everything just comes from the community. All we do with these courses every once in a while come in and just go ahead and update the course based off of what has worked with the community over the last couple months. And so really this course might even be outdated by the time you go through it. How do we know that? Because things in business are always changing. Things in business are always updating. And if you're waiting for us to go out and make these professional videos for you, well, guess what? These professional videos are only there to get you started. And then all of the latest cutting edge, up-to-date learning is happening inside of the community. And so if you are stuck, if you're in your head, if you're struggling, if you're not able to move forward, make sure that you are even being vulnerable in the community, right? It's okay. Like post in there because we are all a peer group. We're helping each other. And then if you're not getting comments on your post, if other people are not responding to your post, well, then the question would be like, hey, how many friends have you made inside of this program? If you don't have any friends and you're not able to tag anybody that you know personally, then you're not going to get comments. You're not going to get replies. You're not going to get answers to your questions. And that's why giving is so important, because the more you give, the more you're building that reciprocity, you're building those friendships, you're building those relationships. So that way, when you go to ask, you actually get responses back, right? But if you go and post and nobody answers your question and it's just crickets, it's probably because you haven't built any relationships. You don't have a relationship bank account that you can actually even pull from. And so that's why it's so important for you to understand this concept, especially as you are waiting for your corporation to happen in the background. You're going to continue to work. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you continue to move on to the next training. We have so much more to go ahead and get you set up with your business platform, your website, all of that exciting stuff is up and coming. So we will catch you immediately in the next training section.